Everyone, welcome to the April 14th Lakeville Area Schools School Board meeting. Tonight is a work session. If we could go around and do roll call, that would be great. I'll start and then move to my left. Amber Cameron.
Matt Swanson.
Tony Reichenberger.
Brenda Albrecht.
Emily McDonald.
Kim Baker. Carly Anderson.
Michelle Humphrey. Tracy Brovold.
Paul Carbone.
Ryan Thompson.
Michael Bauman.
Great, thanks everyone. The first item for tonight is the review and comment public hearings. This is in the board packet. If I'm understanding things correctly, and Superintendent Bauman, please jump in if I'm misrepresenting here, but Minnesota statute requires the document that was presented in the board packet as a review and comment statement related to our proposed school construction projects. And so the letter that's in the packet is from the Minnesota Department of Education. And as you can see at the end of the letter, the department provided a positive review and comment, and it's just part of the process to bring it to the board. It does not require any vote, but if there's any questions or discussion on it, perhaps Michael can entertain that because you're the content expert.
Sure, I will either that or I will get the question and get it answered for you.
Any questions or concerns or comments about the document? Okay, yeah, Matt.
I mean, this is just another one of these statutory obligations that you have to do.
Correct, and so that's why we brought two things. The architect came in, went through all this, as well as our financial advisor also went through everything with you. So just to make sure you were well informed, there's no change to anything you've already heard, and we did receive a positive review from MDE. It has to go through MDE review just to validate, confirm, or deny any particular issues that are could cause a problem, and so we were in full compliance.
Go ahead. Yeah.
And just so I'm clear, even if the if the bond vote's successful, then it still has to go through another review before we move forward with MDE?
We have to validate the vote. We have to refine the plan, and they get to look at the refined plan. But it must stay within the financial requirements that we put to our voters, which is $139.6 million.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. So maybe piggyback off of Michael and Matt here, just a reminder to the community that our referendum bond is open for early voting here at district office, and May 12th is the election night, and so get out and vote, and there's plenty of information on the district website. If you have questions, or feel free to reach out to any board member or staff if you have further questions than what's beyond the website. All right, moving to our next item, I'd like to invite Terry Morrow up to the table. So as the board knows and staff members know, we've been working through policy updates as part of our work here in the district. And I was having a conversation, I don't know, a month or so ago with Terry about a question on one of our policies. And Terry just mentioned, because you're the person who went through the audit for our for 194, all of our policies, that if it would be helpful for you to come and walk through kind of MSBA's process on the model policies and how school boards might approach this process. I said, sure, that'd be great. So we're lucky to have you here. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
As the content expert. And so just for everyone's knowledge, in case you don't know, Terry's general counsel for the Minnesota School Board Association. And it looks like there's a document getting passed around here that I think Terry will go through. But then in addition, thank you, Kim Elson printed a couple of documents from the policy audit. I'm not sure if that ever got distributed fully to the board, so just some further information as we move forward here. So Terry, I'll turn over to you, and I know there's a couple of policies on the agenda that we could work through as examples, if that's helpful, but is it okay to?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you all for having me here. Please feel free, for your schedule at least, interrupt me anytime, ask any questions. If there's something I don't get to or I don't know, you certainly can call me or email me, text me and ask me as well. I don't want anyone to either feel rushed or feel that I didn't get to everything. Yeah, I did your policy audit. That was reflected. Do you want me to have a mic?
Is your mic on? Is it,
This is on green.
Okay, okay, good.
Yeah. If you haven't already seen this, this is the chart I prepared, and there was also a report that had our logo up in the top left corner. Your policies were in pretty good shape. There were some gaps. The gaps were identified in that policy audit. What we do is we take every one of your policies that has an MSBA model policy equivalent, and we just see what the differences are. And depending what the nature of those differences are, we make recommendations on how a school board should proceed. We did about 35 policy audits for districts last year, so a lot of districts are doing the very good work that you all did as well. The way we come up with model policies, the model policy program began in 1996. And the theory was at that time, from what I'm told, is that the federal and the state government were starting to require districts to have mandatory policies, policies that every school district had to adopt. And rather than have Lakeville pay and then St. Peter pay and then Mankato pay lawyers to create essentially the same policy, MSBA started creating model policies in areas that school districts had to have a policy, a mandatory policy. We continue that process to this day. We have approximately 140 policies. I don't think there's any district that's adopted 140 policies. Our policies do break down into several types, and I'm going to give you this chart, and I'll pass them both ways. This discussion is also at the bottom of your agenda. There are three types of policies. There are mandatory policies, legal requirement policies, and recommended policies. And then the chart that I just gave you identifies which ones are mandatory, which ones are legal requirements, and which ones are recommended. There are approximately 38 or so mandatory policies, the blue ones on that first couple of pages you see. As I mentioned about 2 minutes ago, every school district is required to have a mandatory policy. So for example, equal education policy, policy 102. Every school district in the country has to have an equal education opportunity policy if they want to receive federal funding. Many of the federal laws on mandatory policies are tied to funding. If you don't want to adopt if a district doesn't want to adopt the policy, the district doesn't have to adopt the policy, but it will not get the funding. So that's how the federal government can do mandatory policies. The state, because the states have primary control over K-12 education, at least theoretically, we can have a different discussion about that, but the states can make direct laws impacting K-12 education. They don't have to tie it to funding in order to do it. I was on the school board in St. Peter. We could talk a lot about unfunded mandates, but let's put that one aside. We'll put a lot of discussions right over here. So mandatory policies, those are the first things we looked for in your policy audit. Make sure you've got every mandatory policy. If there was a missing mandatory policy, then it was our very strong recommendation. That's the first thing to tackle as a school board. Adopt the mandatory policies. Why? Because in part, the federal government can withdraw funding. The state can do audits, and if the district doesn't have a mandatory policy, the state also can withhold funding from a school district if it doesn't have a mandatory policy. Mandatory policies are very difficult, quite difficult to revise, because mandatory policies almost entirely quote the law. They quote FERPA, the Family Education Privacy Rights Act. They quote Minnesota's Pupil Dismissal Act. So it's very difficult for a board to revise, change the language in the mandatory policy. I will also note, though, that with mandatory policies, sometimes the law simply says every school district must have a bullying policy, but it doesn't say what has to be in it. Other policies, like the library policy that we've had out, I do believe that you'll need to adopt The library materials policy, if you haven't already, I think that may have shown up. I can't recall in our audit. I actually could look right now.
I think 1, 2 is 512, school-sponsored student publication and activities. Is that what you're referring to?
That's a different, but
Okay.
this is a good way, this is a good opportunity to go through this. Going through the 400s, you had all the mandatory policies. I didn't see the tobacco policy at the time I did the audit. I believe you do have one, but we didn't see it. So I'm glad to see that you've got that one.
Right.
Other than that, I thought there was one more. Maybe you all are fine. Let's just check through here. Oh, yeah, school-sponsored publications, 512. It's on page 10 of this chart. About 2 years ago or so, the Minnesota legislature passed a law requiring schools to have a policy about student journalists. And we put that into our existing policy 512. Again, you may have a policy, and we didn't have it reflected at the time we did our review, but from our advice, one thing the school board should do is adopt mandatory policies where mandatory policies are missing. The next category is legal requirements policies. They're in the green. Legal requirements policies are almost identical to mandatory policies because both largely quote federal or state law. They're difficult to revise or change because they're quoting the law. The only difference between mandatory and legal requirement is the law does not require you to adopt a legal requirements policy. So the policy sets out the legal requirements that fall upon the district, but there is no law that says you have to adopt any green policy. So you could choose to ignore, now, I mean ignore in a nice way, you could choose to not adopt any of the green policies that are on this chart. If you don't adopt one of the green policies, your district still must follow the law that's in that policy. So not adopting the policy doesn't get you off the hook, if you will, for the law. For example, drug, alcohol, and cannabis testing. You still have to follow that law even if you don't adopt policy 416. You do have 416. I think it just had to be updated because of the cannabis language. I don't know what's in yours at the time.
Can I interject for
Please, yeah, please.
So for the green ones, so the blue ones make sense. Like, it's a law. We don't have a choice. It is what it is. And as I look at some of the green ones, I think, and we'll come back to this later. I think what I recognize is that the model policies is MSBA's version of the legal requirement, or of the mandated requirements.
That's fair.
Right.
But I would say it gets really difficult, Member
Yeah.
Thompson, because we get into using the words mandatory and legally required. I know that gets
Sorry,
confusing.
Mandatory policy,
So-
mandatory language.
Yes, if I step back 1 second, I think there are a couple of functions here with policies, and your board can determine its own philosophy when it comes to school district policies. The mandatory ones you have to have.
Yep.
We encourage districts to adopt the green ones, the legal requirements ones, because your policy website, your policies are a very common way for your staff to find out what the rules and the laws are, and for your parents and your students and your community. I can't tell you the number of times I'm speaking to the principals tomorrow, and the principals tell me they go to our policies to see what is the law on X. They don't go to look up the law on the Minnesota state website. So I would just encourage you to consider the green ones as an opportunity to share with your community and make it easy for your community to find out what are the laws and rules on everything from drug testing to overdose medication to violence prevention.
So let me circle
Please.
back, because so my first question, I'm sorry, I've got two. So the blue ones are mandatory language that the state says you need to have this as a policy. Those are the blue ones, correct?
If I could, I'm going to be the lawyer here,
Yeah, go
Member
ahead.
Thompson, and
Yep.
tweak it a little bit. You must have an equal opportunity, education opportunity policy. It is mandated by federal law.
Got it.
It doesn't tell you what words have to be in that policy.
Okay.
So for example, the state's bullying statute says every district must have a bullying policy.
But the content
It
within.
doesn't tell us the content necessarily.
Got it. And so if we are reviewing content,
Mm-hmm.
we have to make sure that the content that we are including meets the mandatory content. Well, no, I'm sorry, there is no mandatory content. It's a mandatory policy. You need to have a policy. Whatever that policy is, we're not going to dictate if it's good, half good, or poor. The fact that you have one, that's all that we're asking for. And that's what the blue categories are
Yeah,
for.
and if I might, yes, absolutely. If you watch the Masters, what we do with the blue policies, we try to just hit a 3-wood down the middle of the fairway. We're trying to stay with the law and not go to the sides and start adding best practices or the like. With the blue ones, we try to say there was a court case that said this, there's a law that says this, there's an attorney general opinion, but there's some legal basis. So when you see the blue ones, they are rather constricted because we know you have to adopt something, a blue policy.
Yep.
We don't want to start going astray from the purpose of giving you a mandatory bullying policy. So our blue ones tend to be right down the middle.
So your blue ones, I'm viewing this from a product development lens. It's a minimum viable product MVP. It's just like, this is the bare basics of what we think for you to have as a policy. Now, you've got lawyers over at MSBA reviewing the legal content, creating the content. Is anyone at MSBA validating with the state this content meets and is satisfactory of the state? But because the state doesn't care what you have, as long as you just have a policy, it is MSBA's interpretation of, we think this is the minimum that we think you ought to have. You know what I mean?
I'm comfortable generally with what you said, Member Thompson, yes. I'm going to give you a policy example. You all should look at policy 721 at some point. It had a terrible title. Uniform Grant Guidance for Federal, it was the federal law that if you got a grant, here's all the receipts you had to do. Here's how you had to do bidding. Here's how you have conflict of interest. Here's how you could spend money on travel under that grant. We've changed the title to procurement policy because what was happening is MDE, not so much the federal government, but MD, they send out auditors, and Superintendent Baumann, you can speak to the idea that you'll get your special education program, your food services programs get audited. And MDE will look at your policies as part of an audit and then write to you or tell you, your policy 721, for example, is deficient because you're missing this provision.
So I'm trying to get to, for you
Yeah.
to answer,
Yeah.
are your blue mandatory policies, the content that you've created, are they vetted and approved by the state?
So in 721 is going to be my example. In 721, I disagreed with MDE's general counsel. They didn't read they may look at them. We don't send them to get a stamp of approval because they don't have the time to do it. Maybe they should, but they don't. But on 721, I was hearing from the superintendents, we just got dinged on your policy because we don't have a conflict of interest thing. We just got dinged on your policy because we don't have X. And I finally, after a series of meetings with MDE, they agreed their auditors were wrong, that it wasn't a legal requirement to put those provisions in a policy. And so then I sent them the new 721,
Yep.
Member Thompson, because I thought I better get a seal of approval before I rewrite this policy. So moving forward, we might try to develop a relationship where if a policy seems, if we're not certain that we're on that straight down the middle, it's just the law,
Yep.
no debate, on anything that might be debatable, I think we are going to expand that practice.
But at this time,
Yeah.
blue policies, mandatory policies, we have to have one. The content in it is variable, and we get to pick and choose, because there's no cop, there's no police that says your policy is wrong until maybe we get dinged. But you've got your own version, but your version, at the moment, it's not stamped, it's not vetted, it's not approved by MDE or by the state. It is just MSBA's interpretation of how you read the state statutes and create a policy around that. Like,
I know, it would be so much easier for me to say yes, but it's not yes. It depends on the policy. So policy 515 is your protection and privacy of pupil records policy. We quote FERPA word for word.
Yep.
We quote the law word for word.
but no one is validating that it's approved by the state.
I agree there's no stamp of approval.
Okay.
Yes, I agree there's no stamp of approval, but it's not MSBA's language. Does that make sense? It's FERPA that's in the policy. It's not our language that we created.
Given what you just shared about, the numbers like the back of your hand, but the one you're referencing around the audit, whatever it was. 721, thank you. Is there a benefit to having more districts be in alignment in policy so that we have a mass of districts who are interpreting the same things very similarly, so that when these things arise, we can say, look, everyone every member of MSBA, or however it is, this is the policy that everyone's adhering by. And so MDE here, you might not be interpreting this correctly. It's like the power of participation.
I agree with that. And so the legislature is again looking at doing another cell phone bill. And for years, I've been saying, first I was saying, trust me, every middle school has cell phone rules. You do not have to tell schools to create them. They've got rules. Nope, they were bound and determined to require something. First they were going to say phones are banned. And then they realized they couldn't do phones were banned. So then you might recall a year or two ago, they said every district has to have a policy. Fine. Our ability to go in and say 329 of 331 districts have already adopted this language right here is a powerful message of back off. It's already done. You're not achieving. So that is helpful from an advocacy point of view.
Yeah.
It's also helpful as we talk to different state agencies to be able to say, Minnesota school districts are looking to do this with Narcan, for example. We did a lot of work to help make it possible for schools to have Narcan in the schools. The nurses had come to us and said, there are legal problems. Can you help us get the law changed and then create a policy on Narcan? So there are benefits like that as well.
that would make sense to have a group say, hey,
Right.
this is, yeah.
Yep.
So wouldn't that be the purpose of following MSBA, is if you guys have the expertise that you have and you accumulate enough districts behind that, then that's the core.
Well, for the mandatory ones, yes. I think that seems reasonable. But you've got to have, let me refresh that. I would assume that the school districts, the school boards need to have the flexibility and the autonomy to flex their policies, whether it strengthen or not strengthen the legal policies or all the other policies thereafter, so that is applicable to their respective school district. There's some districts that may not need as I don't know, whatever.
We're talking
Policies.
about the mandatory ones.
But
'cause
for
I
the
think
mandatory
question
ones,
was-
yeah.
yes.
I mean, and I'm looking at the mandatory policies on MSB as well, but like you've got the content and you've got like little references, but it doesn't really highlight in the content itself, this word is directly from this statute. If there is a way that, whether you guys color code it or you highlight it or something of that nature, because when I read it or anybody reads it, I don't know
That's fair.
that you're taking this word out of the legal context and I can't make these changes.
That's fair.
And so there's a little bit of balance of MSBA may say must not do it, or we may decide they shall not do it. So there's different interpretations, but that kind of discretion I think should be left at the school board level when we review policies. And knowing that you have a first pass that you can send to us, we can very clearly see the difference between statutes and not.
If I could just very, very quickly, to be really clear, on the mandatory policies, we're not making a judgment call on words like shall or must. They are quoting the law. I just can't say it. To Member Anderson's point, when I was on the school board, my thought was just basically use the MSBA mandatory policies, because they're just quoting the law. We have to have the policy. I'm oversimplifying. I'm going to expand on that later, but I agree with you on that. Really, the things in the mandatory policies are We could do that. We could we probably would highlight, Member Thompson, the things that aren't quoting the law, because it'd be less highlighter.
Yep.
Because it really, like 515, it would virtually every word to be highlighted, because it's quoting the law. I'm sorry, Member Swanson, thank you.
Oh, no. My guess is, I mean, you're quoting the law just because you know you're safe then, right? And if you're following exactly what the law says, then you're complying with what the law says in your policy. But that doesn't mean you can't change the language, right? The problem is the further you get away from the stated text of the statute, then you might get an argument of, well, you're interpreting it wrong or something like that.
But the mandated policy is like, I thought we established that we have to have a policy of it, but the content is at our discretion.
Well, I think
If we
that
choose to
depends
be-
on the policy. I think there are some policies that there's probably a lot of discretion, and there's probably like a baseline, like, well, you have to have these requirements. We can go more strict if we
Right.
want, or more detailed, but there's going to be certain baseline requirements for certain policies, where other ones, bullying policy, we can have whatever we want, right? Unless there's a specific law on it.
You would have a lot of discretion, for example, on your student discipline policy, policy 506. You're required by law to have a student discipline policy. It doesn't say what you have to list as infractions.
Sure.
So you could go in and say, no, we don't agree with MSBA's list of 22 categories. You
Yeah.
could,
So to Brian's point, it would be interesting to know which policies are more subjective, as far as where could you go in and
Mandatory level.
and tailor them more specifically to the needs of your district, as
Sure.
opposed to like, hey, don't mess with these ones, because we
And
track.
it's not that we were going to mess with them. I think it's just for awareness. Where is the source data coming from?
Sure.
That's telling us we have to do this.
Well, I'm sure it's all in the footnotes at the bottom of each
Yes.
policy, right? If you want to go through every one of them.
Legal references.
And from a certain standpoint, because the language is coming from, federal law, from state law, from, case law, from presidential nature, and that's the language your attorneys and everybody put into the model laws, the further you would deviate from those laws, the more you're opening the door to potential liability and other problems that could result.
I can give you a quick example. Yes. So policy 515, the student one, this is coming up a lot right now in districts around the state. There's a subject in your policy about student information called directory information. Every school board every year is supposed to say, here's the information about our students that we're going to give to the public if the public asks. Have any of you, I'm not going to put you on the spot.
Oh, I got in trouble. Well,
Well, I wasn't,
I made it on the news.
well, I really didn't know about that.
Sorry.
But what I will say is that legislators are still asking schools to provide lists of high school seniors and their addresses so that the legislators can send congratulation letters. And I've spoken to a number of superintendents again this week saying, you can't do that. The law changed 2 years ago. The state said you cannot give out parent or student contact information. And so then some folks went back to the policy and found they didn't update their policy 515. So it still said that parent information was to be provided. And so I won't say which company that sells things that people like to buy for seniors, but they really started pushing and said, well, your policy says you'll give it to us. So that, Member Reichenberger, that's an example of if your policy doesn't align with the law, you're kind of in a bad position because you both have to follow the actual law. Don't give out the parent information. But your policy says you're going to give it out, so the folks on the ground who have to answer the calls from the, I won't say the company's name, they're stuck because the policy says something different than the law.
You can say it.
I'm sorry?
You can say the name.
The last category, I won't say it quickly anymore because I'm clearly not that quick, but are the recommended policies. They're in white on this form. They are very much kind of best practices. Now we're really in an area where you all can decide that it looks great. We're going to change it at will. We don't want it at all. You really have a lot of latitude on those. I will note, though, for example, there is a policy on data. You don't have policy 206, I think. That's kind of our public comment policy. public participation at your meetings, and like, there's stuff in there about data privacy. You don't want someone at public comment getting up and starting to talk about a student, because it would violate data privacy law. So there is some law in recommended policies, but it's very minor. We've really flipped the table from mandatory, where mandatory is almost all law, recommended is almost no law.
Is recommended more operating procedures to an extent, again, because I see, order of a regular school board meeting, consent agendas, and again, you've got some that kind of go beyond SOPs to what is the superintendent, policy implementation, like.
So if we could start on the first, we're not going to go through every page, but if you look on the first page of this chart, you'll see that policy 103, complaints, is a recommended policy.
No, I got it. I got it.
It's not grounded in law, but I promise you that your superintendent and everyone else down the line are glad you have a complaints policy, so they can point to it and say, you've got to put that in writing. We've got a chain of decision-making. So they're nice that way, in that they can provide recourse for your staff to turn to, or when you get to the 200s, remember, Thomas, as you mentioned, there was a news story just the other day. There's a board that's having discussions about what does a consent agenda mean. And so to have a consent agenda policy then says, okay, it's, for our board, this is what we understand about consent agendas. But if you didn't have it,
That makes sense. Yeah, it was fascinating. There's a school in California that has on their website a school district's policy, and then they also have the school district's procedures that's
Yes.
associated to that policy. And while our district doesn't have something like that, there is a little bit of gray and a little, it gets a little murky where we're embedding some school district procedures into policies, where a policy, like we're gonna have a consent agenda generally means this, blah, 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 yeah.
I absolutely agree. There are two things that are coming. One, the larger districts, Minneapolis, 196, Duluth, they do have policy and then procedures, regulations. They do have subsidiary documents all built in. It seems to, I don't know if it's a resource question, but the larger districts do tend to do exactly what you're describing. Absolutely.
I got another question, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll keep jumping. Am I supposed to?
It's not your fault.
Okay, so the blue ones, I get. The green ones, the legal requirements policy. And so these are, so the state is saying, we don't need to have a policy in this
Correct.
kind of scenario. But you're recommending that we have a policy because there are some things like drug and alcohol testing that could be a HR standard best practice in how they do things, but technically, we don't need to have a policy on it.
Correct.
As long as we're doing it, right?
If I could add to that, for the position that I am in as your HR person, if we didn't have that, I have no reference on finding statute that relates to something like drug and alcohol. So then I would have to search statutes, try to find the correct law. There could be laws that I missed because I didn't use the right search terms, or I'm gonna have to get on the phone to our legal counsel, which is gonna cost us a lot of money.
Got it.
So we have to follow these no matter if we pass them or not.
Correct.
So-
And if I may build on that, because that's, you're absolutely right. I think the green ones, they're meant for staff and for students. That's right. And so if you look at page 5, for example, on this list, the employment background check policy is a legal requirements policy. You don't have to adopt it. But it's very helpful to be able to turn to and say, okay, I know here's the latest federal and state law on employment background checks. We're getting a lot of questions. We did get a lot of questions on the next page, policy 414, mandatory reporting of child neglect. That's a complex process. And it is, again, a place where staff or parents or kids who are wondering, how do these things get reported and dealt with? It's there. The cannabis testing, that's the one we've worked so hard because it's so complex between the federal and the state governments for bus drivers and others. What gets tested, what doesn't get tested, how do you test it? And so it's a nice resource. That's what I would call the green ones.
Would most districts have these?
I think most districts have the green ones,
Okay.
yes.
Yep. And so then the green ones, how do you create them? Because because the state says you don't need to have a policy, but then you see new laws getting passed at the state level, and like this is going to impact our schools, and so like we need to create a policy around it. So then your legal nerds get back in the corner and they just kind of put together these policies and say, hey, here's what we recommend, or here's how we think a policy would be adopted to ensure that the state law is being followed, because we don't have because either our guys at our office are looking at state laws constantly saying, oh, this one impacts our school. We better create a policy on it. We won't have the manpower to probably do that. So then we have to come to organizations like MSBA who are creating these
Provide
policies.
model policies.
Right.
With best practice recommended or baked into that.
Yes.
So if I might turn, for as an example, if you turn to page 9, and you look at policy 507. 507 was the prone restraint, and you know the prone restraint debates that happened in the state. And that's SROs, or school resource officers, became part of that debate. And MSBA participated in the process of trying to make those laws clear, and it was a slog, but the laws were clear. For that reason, we created 507.5 on school resource officers, knowing that districts that didn't have school resource officers, they shouldn't bother adopting the policy. They don't need it. But it's a great policy because it explains what has to be in the agreement with law enforcement. Again, it's that resource for districts. So if we identify what we think is a significant need, and beyond 1 or 2 districts, we will sometimes create a green policy so that the staff and everyone else has that resource available to them to address what we seem to think is an issue coming forward. Same thing on the next page, on page 11, 516.5 overdose medication. That was the Narcan policy that the Minnesota Department of Health came to us and said, would you please do something with us on this, because our school nurses are in a very bad liability position unless we get a policy and a law in place concerning Narcan. So that's how we come up with some of the green ones.
So can I just clarify?
Please.
If you, in this case, when we're missing that policy, there is statute around it. Does that protect the nurses in our district? I mean, obviously it would help if we had an added policy, but if I guess I'm wondering if our nurses are currently not able to do that.
I think your nurses would feel relatively comfortable with the laws on the books. I think you're raising a very good point.
Okay.
If I were a nurse, I probably wouldn't want the district to affirm that I'm not going to be liable if we bring, if your district doesn't bring Narcan in, if your district is saying, no, we're going to keep it out, then I'd say, okay, then I guess you really don't need it. But if I were a nurse, maybe it's belt and suspenders. I'd want that local affirmation that as a board, we're taking the position that Narcan will be administered in the school.
Okay.
I think something I appreciate, especially about the blue and the green, is that, we are resource constrained. Most school districts are. We don't have general counsel on our staff. And so we're able to kind of utilize you and MSBA as the experts to inform us and keep us informed about changes that we should be considering, right? And have to abide by no matter what. Because we just don't have the capability to do that ourselves.
And if I might give you an example on page 13, this is great, but page 13, policy 530, in your audit, I said, MSBA will soon issue an update for the immunization policy. What happened with the immunization policy is on the MDH, the Minnesota Department of Health website, they put a statement that even though Minnesota law said that you could share immunization records, the federal government's position was you could not share immunization records, generally speaking.
With who?
What is it? I don't.
Okay.
Generally speaking,
Okay.
The federal government's position was much more constricted as to who immunization records could be shared with. The state one was broader. There's something called, and I would say it's MIC, or so, there's a state database in which immunization records could be So if there's a smallpox or measles problem, the state can start to identify where do we have to concentrate efforts. MDH put on its website that it believes that the state position is in conflict with the federal position and that the federal position should prevail. So we worked with MDH to really understand, and with our lawyers, what do? We changed policy 530. You really should take a good look at that one because we took out the provision that would have allowed that sharing on that broader basis because we've got a state agency saying, we don't think you have a leg to stand on, even though it's a state law. And our lawyer said, yeah, for liability and privacy purposes. So again, I'm using this, Member Cameron, as just an example of when we create policies, we're always monitoring to see if we have to update them so that everyone can remain compliant.
So I think, so here's the issue that I think that I'm running into is like, I want to agree, I want to trust the MSBA model policies that come out. When we receive them, I think some of the challenges that when we look at the content itself, if we change a word, we remove a sentence, we add something, we don't know if it breaks the intent of the model policy.
Right.
And so all the things that we might have done over the past couple weeks around policies being adopted, we don't know. And I won't even know because I'm going to say, logically, I want a phone call if you look at my child's backpack, right? But did that break an existing policy or a state statute that we may not be aware of? So then it's almost where, candidly, do you just blanket approve mandatory policies and legal requirements because they're coming from state statutes, they're coming from the state regulatory piece, and with the assumption that you guys are, hitting the golf ball right down the middle, there is no deviation, there is no whatever, it's like it is the best that we can to be as true as we can, and what we really should be focused on maybe are the yellows, where we have more flexibility that is not tied to any legal state statutory impacts. But I don't know, I'm not an expert in like the license status or the staff development, but it's, I don't know.
I'm going to give you more room to be creative, even on the mandatories. But those are the three types that we have. Let me turn, if I might, to two documents, and we can then talk about those three policies. I don't want to take too much of your time,
Oh, you're fine.
but I created
As
a
long as people, it's interesting.
sample policy review process for your board. This is a document that I just created to try to help with when boards engage in policy review. I'm going to be happy to send this to you as a document that you can adjust as you want, if you want. But what I tried to do in this document was kind of lay out how would a 7-person school board perhaps engage in the policy review, policy adoption process. On the first page, I just gave kind of if you're going to do it, I don't know if you have workshops or study sessions.
Like this, yeah.
Like this.
Yep.
That each one you could schedule X number of policies to review. And then I give a checklist of the questions at the bottom. Has the policy been reviewed? Is it legally mandatory policy? Does the policy reflect where your community is on certain topics? To that end, before we go on, I also have, and this is small print, I'm sorry, I'm going to send you the electronic copy. I have a spreadsheet that you all can adopt so you can track your policy review. You can put down the date. Okay, we reviewed this policy August 2027. So just a couple of, as you look through this document, most districts will, if you look on page, it says page 3, and I'm not sure what happened to page, but page 3. If you look at this document, the second page, it says recommended monthly rotation 3-year cycle. Most school districts in Minnesota do a 3-year cycle for policy review. They do 1/3 of the policies a year.
Yep.
They do that in part because with elections, school boards change. It also is a good reminder of what the policies say. So I gave you a sample year 1, year 2, year 3 approach that you could start to do if you wanted to do so. Then you turn to page 4, and I'm not going to go through every page, but I took the series. Series 1 is about the school district. I amended this so that the policies that are numbered there are the policies you have. Not the model policies, the policies that you have. And I just would suggest, okay, then you would just make sure, is the name correct? Is the legal status correct? Is the educational policy up to date? Just some questions you could ask as a board. I did that for each series. So for every series, as you flip through, you'll see a checklist of things to think about, maybe a focus, and then the policies that would come under that series that you all have adopted. So I'm going to leave that with you, Chair Cameron, if I might. I'm happy to talk about it more, but I think it's probably somewhat self-explanatory, but I think you were looking for maybe what would be a policy review and adoption process you could use.
So do you have recommendations? And I realize some of these categories have more, like the 100 series only has 4, and they're kind of less meaty, you could argue. Whereas, some of these others have quite like Series 5 has many, right? Because it's about students. I think we're spending a lot of time on each policy, which is, there's great discussion, but I think it's this balance of like, this would be a very aggressive timeframe from how we've been operating. Like, we would be here all day, every day doing policy, like 8 hours a day, in order to tackle this schedule. So.
Won't be here that long.
Well, so I mean, we're spending hours on every policy, really talking about a sentence and the technical edits only. We're not even really in the meat of the policy, suggestions. So how do boards do this?
I will note that what I tried to do on page 2, the 3-year cycle, was I only covered 6 months, so I tried to leave 6 months where you weren't talking about policy.
Okay.
And I tried to divide the bigger ones into several months, like the 600s. I divide into 3 months
Yep.
so that you didn't have to try to bite off all.
Got it.
You're
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
though. You could talk about one policy
Right.
for hours.
Yep.
Districts do that. And to that point, I want to make sure you all are aware of a service we do provide, and I did it just today for a very big district. They were looking at policy 620, the student survey 520, the student survey policy. And the administrative staff was, so usually staff were asked to contact me and say, Terry, the board wants to know X. All right. So the staff contacted me and said, they want to know if they have to have these sentences in. And I said, well, yes. And we were on a Zoom call, and I just pulled up the federal law, FERPA, and I said, yes, parents have a right to know about instructional materials. It's right here in federal law, and the sentence that your board's asking about is quoting from there. I'm always happy to do that.
Sure.
Now, maybe I wouldn't be happy after a while, but that is something we get asked by districts every week. We get asked by boards every week. Do we have to have this language? Can we change this? I do think there's a way in the future, Member Thompson, there's a better way to do that.
It's got to be a way where if I
agree.
delete a sentence, something pops up and says, you're going to break a law.
I think there's an AI way to do this, but I hear you.
I can create,
But
you know what, we can create an app. Let's do an app. Let's do an app.
I'm not dismissing what you said. You do have the old school way of calling me or emailing me to say, can we change this? And I can say, no, I wouldn't touch that one, it's according to law, or it's not according to law, go ahead, I mean.
And that's part of our MSBA membership
Yep.
fee, so that if we wanted to reduce our legal expenditures, instead of sending our policy updates to them, we could kick it to you, you can do a quick review. So you might actually be like a step 4 in our review process, potentially.
That's fine.
Can I put something out there as a possibility? Because I know I agree that this is a rather aggressive approach for how we've been moving. But do boards ever kind of say, in this series, let's say there's 15 policies. This round of reviews, we're going to pick 2 that we're going to take a deep dive on. Everything else, we're just updating according to technical language or legal statutes. 2 we're going to dive on versus reviewing every, does that make sense?
It
Like,
does make sense, and that's maybe a good point to pivot, and then we'll talk about your 3 policies. We send out, and I don't know if you see it, we don't send it anymore, but it's available, our policy services newsletter. And we try to do it 4 times a year. The most recent came out in February. The next one will come out in June after the legislative session is over. At a minimum, if this board completed the policy audit, I know it's a big task, I'm not putting it down, but if it completed this and were really diligent on keeping up with the revisions that come out in the newsletter, then I think your approach makes perfect sense. You don't need to review all 15 because 12 of them haven't changed since the last time. And by review, I mean, you can confirm, okay, yes, especially for new members who weren't here last time you looked at that policy, but you might say, okay, here's the policy on student fundraising. This is really an accounting thing to make sure the money goes to the right place. Next policy, as opposed to digging into the student activity account. I'm agreeing, it didn't change, it hasn't changed. The Pledge of Allegiance policy hasn't changed for 20 years.
Right. So I think very likely if we were to kind of review a series, we might say, these are ones that in our community have been brought up, or we've had complaints, or we've had issues. And those might be ones that we say, or maybe a certain series, we do dig a little bit more. But I think if we have the goal of running every single policy through the school board versus saying, let Brenda kind of update us on what the legal statutes are requiring in terms of changes, you know, that might help us move a little faster and be in compliance. Because I think for some of us, or I guess all of us, are probably concerned about, are we out of compliance with certain policies and things like
We
that?
probably are, yeah. I mean, we're not out of compliance in my mind, I think, because the law is still going to trump our policies. We are not communicating to those who are reading our policies
That's a
what the
problem.
state laws
It's
are.
liability,
Yes.
right?
It's a lie.
Yeah.
That is a problem because I reference policy almost every day. I have to look at a policy almost every day, and if it's not up to date and statute has changed, and it's not a statute that I don't remember off the top of my head,
Yeah.
I'm gonna follow an incorrect process based on what I'm looking at in the policy.
Yep. Hey, Carly, I think you're right, where, is there a group of policies, and is there a subset that we want to pull out? Where I want to be mindful is that your interpretations on your belief of the model policy is satisfactory to you. It may not be for another school board member. And so you get the next school board member coming in, because one of the core responsibilities of a school board member is reviewing policies, editing policies, making new policies. And so if we are, as a school board, or no offense, arbitrarily, agreeing to the model policies of the blue ones and the green ones, then for a board member who says no, I don't, like, for example, the conflict of interest for the legal policy sub 210, someone may say, I want it stronger, I want it XYZ. And so if we're not going to give school board members that voice, and it may take a very long time for that particular policy to be completed. But I don't know, that's where I want to be mindful of, where we're not just going to arbitrarily adopt a bunch of stuff and then not give school boards members a voice.
What if there was, because I think we've taken, since I've been on the board and you've been on the board, I think we've taken an approach of a deep dive on every single policy, mostly, that comes before the board. And so it has resulted in not a lot of traction, I would say. And so what if there was, if you, as a school board member, were concerned about a certain policy, you could say, hey, Amber, I want to bring this, in the next few months, can we bring this policy up for review? It would be outside of this kind of planned series, but that would allow a school board member to be able to voice, and have the entire board bring that forth. My concern is that I'm not saying we blanket approve everything through MSBA. I entirely agree that our community is unique in its own ways, since we have to think about what is Lakeville, right? And the surrounding area. But we're just not moving in a way that is keeping Brenda safe. So I want to be, and the district safe, right? So I think there's a compromise to be made here of how do we be efficient and move things through that only need edits to be up to speed, and make sure that Brenda has the appropriate references and cross-references. And also, we can have a periodic of interest. I want to bring this one forth to the board.
Then I think it's a board decision. It's got to be a board
What if we vote?
process. We've got to vote, we've got to decide, hey, I mean, do we want to do a blanket, do we not? Do we want to do individual? I mean, part of the parliamentary process of what we have with Robert's rules is that a board member can interject and make changes and make X, Y, Z. So I mean, you just, I think we have to align as a team that we're going to just go down this path much faster versus pulling things out. But again, not every board member may want to do that. They mean, it's like, I want to pull everything out. I want to talk about every single one. Because that might be the only chance that they have to be able to participate and make a drastic, make a change that they think is appropriate before their term is up. So,
Matt? Yeah.
I mean, we have the benefit of having this. I mean, we didn't have the audit until last year. And so it can kind of prioritize, and I think that was a discussion we had, prioritize to make sure that we have the mandatory ones either up to date or in place. I know, last year we were kind of hoping that we'd have an attorney coming on staff to assist in the process, but we're not quite yet there. But I mean, that could be another thing where we just prioritize, like, hey, if there are these mandatory ones, I mean, first make sure that we're hitting those, updating them, making sure they're in alignment with law, and then address the legal requirement policies to make sure we're not, contradicting any existing law. I'm guessing that I'm guessing most of the time when laws change, they probably become more restrictive. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I think that's probably true.
Yeah, so, yeah.
I'm thinking about the prone restraint, the reasonable use of force, that was.
Yeah, I'm
getting-
just thinking of where we would be open to liability if we're not.
So I think,
can I
Adjusting
just
it.
quick,
Yeah.
look at the wellness one, all right? First page,
What page, Joe?
533, right? The wellness policy is a mandatory policy. And we just went through this, like, I think 3 weeks ago. Because I was like, no, we need to add this, and we need to take that out. And everyone's like, no, we're going to
So
pass it.
we have the wellness policy though, right?
Huh?
Yeah,
We
it.
have a
We have
wellness
approved.
policy,
Yes.
but the words inside the wellness policy around, do we want to have, was it religious foods? Do we want to do, because there was something about birthday parties, and then we were going to exclude it. And I mean, there was like miscellaneous things within it. And so if we knew that everything inside the wellness policy was mandatory related, then I can't remove some of the things that was written in it. You know what I mean? And so, but if I did remove it, would we break a rule? But if we wanted to strengthen it, I mean, that's just one example. You know what I mean? It's just, because we made minor changes, and we don't even know if we broke anything.
I'm wondering if, we didn't make any changes to the wellness policy.
Okay, I think I lost that one. Okay.
We went with just the approved.
You went with the right.
Yeah.
We went with the model policy.
I'm wondering, if there's a combination here of, I think through the audit, you recommended kind of what Matt's referring to, focus first, stage one on mandatory, then legal, then recommended. And so what if we did a process where we start with the mandatory 100s and mandatory 200s, and then cycle back through for the legal ones next, or maybe mandatory and legal could be put together, but, we're kind of triaging a little bit.
Would you like to just, I think in a space of 4 minutes, I can answer the question, tell you, here's the order to do the policies.
Yes, that'd be great.
All right. Ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Somebody taking notes?
Yes,
Oh, we got
it's recorded.
Everybody's getting their pens out.
I'm going to start with the caveat blue first.
Okay.
With blue, first identify and adopt the gaps. Fill the gaps. Mind the gaps, fill the gaps. So in blue, in terms of missing policies, I didn't see 419, but I think you have a tobacco policy. I will go back. I don't know why that was. But I will go back and work on 419.
We have credit for learning done.
Okay, yep.
620.
But if you keep going, 512, that was, again, the student journalism policy.
Yeah.
This is the one that, in the last couple of years, the legislature said you must have a policy on student journalism. This is where we put it.
Okay.
So if you don't have 512, I would adopt 512. 512 would be in the very first flight going out of the airport in the morning, 512.
Okay.
Get a 512. if we keep going, I think your cell phone policy is in your 524, so you don't have to worry about 524.5. You just have to have a cell phone policy, and to Member Thompson's point, I did confirm in writing with MDE, if I put it in 524, cell phones, you're not going to knock them for not having a separate policy, and MDE said, you're correct, Terry. So we did get confirmation. We keep going into the 600s, because you have all the 500 blues. In the 600s, 606.5, you've got to get done.
Okay.
That's the library materials policy. This is has been getting so much public attention, book banning and the like. The law says you have to have a library materials policy, and you don't, at least at the time, and I apologize if I'm speaking out of turn that way, but.
We're not, you are correct.
That would be 512, 606.5. I think you were okay on everything else.
And in the mandatory policies, you are grabbing the state statutes content.
Yes.
You're pretty much putting it in there. This is what it says.
Yes.
And then,
Or federal law.
or federal.
Or
right,
federal,
right.
yes.
But then we have to then decide, do we want to strengthen it or not strengthen it? But then have to ask, if we strengthen it, is it going to contradict whatever the flexibility?
If I might, with all due respect, I would adopt the model policy because you don't have anything, and then if you all want to revise it later, there's nothing in those policies that's going to be so controversial, not so controversial, up for debate, that a sustained debate delaying implementation would be worth it. I would recommend adopt 512 and 606.5, certainly reserve the ability that if you want to make changes to it, you could. But I wouldn't let debate over the substance prevent me from adopting a mandatory policy.
Yeah,
So,
Carly.
question, so in that case, when we're adopting a new policy, that would, so for other policies, if we're just updating, we can send them through the consent agenda. But for new policies that we don't have, we would have to do a first, second, third read, okay.
And even I would say for some, not all would go to consent. Like if we make substantial changes to an existing policy, it would
I
still.
said minor,
Oh, I didn't hear
Yeah.
minor. Okay.
right?
Yeah, no, I
Got
think
it.
those two
Sorry.
should go through if you have a 3-meeting process, not everyone has a 3-meeting process. That is, to Member Thomas's
Ours is
point.
two.
I'll look, oh yeah, that's fine.
First, second,
That's,
just a-
that's
We
fine.
don't technically have to have two, do we?
That's our
The law does not
policy.
state what the,
It's yellow.
I mean,
It's
our
under
current-
recommended.
I'm just saying the law doesn't state, policy 208 is a recommended policy. The law doesn't say how many readings or meetings you have to have.
Right, I mean, so if you want to rip through it, we can. I mean, there's.
Well, we'd have to change our policy
Yeah.
first.
That'd be the first one that we do, and then you rip through it, and then you come back and update it.
I think there's a benefit.
I'm not saying we have to do that, but I'm just saying, it's a yellow, and so,
I'm not going to go through every page again, but I would say 512, 606.5.
Okay.
That's job 1. Job 2, mandatory policies where the review or update box is checked. So you have the policy, if you look, for example, on the first page, equal educational opportunity, it says review or update. When it says review or update, that means the board has a role in deciding whether to make that change. So there were revisions, I think the revisions in the policy have to do with sexual orientation and the new definition of sexual orientation, I think. I'd have to go back and look at your version, but generally speaking, the second stage is going to be, you're going to go through the blues where the review update box is checked.
So this is where I want to be thoughtful. In those situations where we have that many mandatory policies that require review for updating, should we be thoughtful about how many we're trying to move along to to get up to compliance? This go-around, I'm not saying like we can't come back to these things, but if we're out of compliance with,
I'm going to give you a couple that I think are really going to be slower for you in that category, if I might. So like 102, you're going to have to, board should review it. I think, if I recall correctly, what you're going to find is that your policy's definition of sexual orientation discrimination is outdated. And so you can have a discussion, but in the end of the day, you're going to need to follow Minnesota law. So the discussion may not be too long in that, but if I may move through, if you go to policy 406, and Ms. Albrecht, you may feel strongly about, is it for, yeah, public and private personnel data. This is all law, the changes there, but your policy was really out of shape, 406. And I would want to have a discussion as a board on 406 so that you all understand what information about our staff is available to the public, what information from our staff is private or confidential. So again, the changes, there's not going to be a lot of discussion because it's quoting, again, the law, but it's a good substantive discussion for a board to have about what are the rules about employees and their information. Especially as we get to AI, that's a really good conversation to have.
So when you say have a discussion so that we're educated on it,
Yes.
but at the end of the day, 406 is irrelevant because we have to pass it. I mean, because.
You've already got it, you've got to update
Well,
it.
not pass it, but like, it's a mandatory, we're following whatever the content is according to the state. So while we may or may not disagree with the content is the state law. Is that how, I mean, that's how
Yes.
you've shared
There-
blues?
now I'm going to give Brenda the key word. The key word, it's like password. The key word is substantive. If you look at policy 406, it says substantive revisions. Anytime I use the word substantive, I'm saying for that policy, slow down. It's a big change from where you are right now. Maybe you're not going to be able to debate what the changes are going to be, but the changes are going to be big from where you're sitting today.
Okay.
So anytime you saw the word substantive in that comment box, it's a speed bump.
Okay.
If I might then finally, staying on that same page with 406, look up at 402, disability non-discrimination policy. It says technical edits, cross-references added. Personally, and this is not, boards do different things. Personally, I would direct staff to make all the technical edits. I wouldn't even discuss them if I were a board member. The fact that we had to correct a number, or the fact that a statute number changed from 602 to 429, honestly, anything that's marked technical edit doesn't change the policy a whit. It's just cleaning up little things that have changed.
Can we pause there for a minute? I think I appreciate that comment, because what I am hearing from you is that we have some things that we should be triaging first that are missing or are substantial changes. But the technical edits would keep our policies the same as they are today. It's just making it clear for staff what the legal references are, or cross-references, or changing Board of Education to school board is a lot of them. So I think for our board, it's a question of, do we want to give delegation of authority, is that the right term, to Superintendent Bauman and his staff to just implement technical edits, knowing that we still need to go through the review process that you've outlined here. This is not replacing the review, it's just
You
getting.
all would-
So,
Yeah.
I mean, just as a procedural matter, would it just make sense just to basically say all these with just the technical edits, we could just pass on a consent agenda and just say, you know, these are what needs to be fixed. We trust you guys, just make those specific
Yes.
changes.
And that's what I would do, yes. I would do that. You would save yourself headaches. You don't need to get into the substance when all we're doing is adding the most recent Supreme Court case to the cross-references. I'm not belittling that. As a lawyer, that's important to me. But I just wouldn't, you've got so much to do, to your point. I just wouldn't want to spend my time on the technical edits.
As just a practical question, if there was a Minnesota Supreme Court case and they changed how something is phrased, I mean, just as a matter of just a small minor edit as far as how it's phrased in the document, is that still considered a technical edit? Or is it, I mean, that would be reflected in the policy, or is it just, a technical edit is just basically, okay, change in format, citation, at the end, there's nothing substantively changing in the policy whatsoever.
It's a great question. The lawyer former board member, former legislator in me says, I have a very narrow sense of technical edit.
Okay.
If I'm going to err, I'm going to say the board should take a look at this because I'm so much into the board's authority. So the technical
appreciate
edit
it. I
column
get
is
it.
new
Yeah.
because I realized I was making so many revisions and thinking, oh my gosh, don't bring this before the board. It's just a comma that was missing, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, here's an example. Page 9, policy 502, it's blue, technical edits. Search of student lockers, desk, personal possessions, and students' persons. I mean, that's a technical, like, we were gonna just, if we would have followed the model, it's one that we would never have had a conversation about.
Well, and I'm not saying that, Brian. What I'm saying is like, there are many that we need to address sooner than later, is what I'm hearing you say. And that just because we would get the technical edits changed, doesn't mean we wouldn't then review 502, whatever month you said of this,
In the cadence.
yeah, it's not replacing a review, or it's, but it's just, it's keeping our current policy current with these technical changes.
Well, 526 was blue, hazing the hazing policy, and we were supposed to, again, a
Same
technical,
thing.
but we made changes to it. And we made good changes to it.
We didn't
Or
make
didn't we
changes
it-
to them.
I thought
No.
we did, we
No.
didn't change it to like digital? I thought we did a digital thing.
No.
To leverage the value of the audit and to prioritize and execute is to get alignment. We have fallen so far behind. We need to do a little bit of let's get in compliance, let's catch up, and we can still do what you're talking about, Director Thompson. I think with full fidelity and efficacy, we just need to prioritize and execute by, and again, the priority and the plan that I think has been recommended here, and this process here will accomplish everything that I've heard every board member say if we just, what's Nike say? Just do it. And if at any point in time there's any that really get your hackles up, just call me. We'll prioritize it. But I think we really have to move, and I'm just asking politely, can we take that step forward? Because there's a lot of good work here that we can leverage from the efforts that we went through to try to move this forward. But I am sensitive to what you're saying, Director Thompson, very much so. And I would just ask you if at any time you feel there's one that, we just got to stop or pause on, and I'm sure the chair would feel the same way. Don't want to put words in your mouth, but, we want to be, we just need to move forward here is my plea.
What if we,
With a good plan, a really
Yeah.
good plan.
what if we, in the agenda, in our consent agenda, because I think part of it is making sure that the public is also aware of, because people don't listen to our meetings, so, well, some do, but not many. But what if we, in the agenda, just clarify in consent, these policies, technical edits, and then any
Yeah.
other policy that would, the ones that we obviously are reviewing are not going to go through consent.
Right.
Are you
then
saying
that we-
like have a
Like a colon. Like a
parenthetical
colon,
that
yeah.
identifies?
Yeah,
Oh, that's a good idea.
that way the board knows, that way, because
To-
I would hope we all keep track of this lovely work that MSBA did for us. Thank you, Cherry. But it's, I
Yeah.
think that's the work of, or our work, to kind of make sure that all of the board is up to
Yeah.
speed on which ones we're trying to move through consent for that reason, and, yeah.
How do other people feel about that?
Sounds fine to me.
Knowing that there's a lot to tackle in just these first, but then I need you to keep
Well,
going.
it's very
Then we
easy
move
from
to
that
green.
point on, because green, I would do the same thing. I would look at green and say, are there any green policies that are missing that you think maybe the board should consider adopting? And that would be a substantive 3-2 meeting, in your case, process. But that's the first thing I would do, is say, are there any green ones That's maybe, maybe administration recommends, you know what, I really think we should add the criminal background check. That would really help me. And I do think you should leverage staff on the green ones. Staff may have very good input on, it would be very helpful in my position if we had adopted the drug, alcohol, and cannabis. Oh, no, that was a review. That one was that.
Yeah.
And then I would do the same thing. Technical edits on green ones that you have, I would just approve them. Because they're not going to change the substance. They really are just clean up. Sometimes, like when I changed everything to Board of Education for your board, that to me was a technical change. Because you should be able to call yourselves what you want to call yourselves. So I try to make it uniform throughout.
Can I ask another question that I think we've dealt with, I certainly have, is, the 200 series is about our board, how we want to operate. Most of the others are about how the content experts in our district operate, right? So how do boards weigh administrative input, revision recommendations, their legal counsel recommendations, versus like the knowledge that we bring to our seat in balancing how a policy might get revised?
That's a great question. I think, I won't say it's a more common, I think this is probably the most effective method is to get input from individuals on topics that the board is not sufficiently conversant on, that it can make its own call on an issue.
Okay.
So the policy, the code of ethics policy.
Yeah.
You all can do whatever you want with the code of ethics policy. I don't think you have to bring in lawyers or others to.
Yeah.
I think
Right.
you all as a board can set your expectations for yourselves. But when it comes to drug, alcohol, and cannabis testing, if someone from staff says, you know what, we're really behind,
Yeah.
I would want their input because they'll know better than you because they're trying to implement the policy and they know it's either not existent or it's not correct. And it's just such professional, I mean, you're just across from me. I'm not meaning you're doing anything wrong, but as an employee, I would be nervous if I felt I was working with tools that were not in the toolbox or that were out of date in the toolbox.
Okay.
So I would listen to administration when they say, it would be helpful if the board would consider adopting
This version.
X.
Sure.
If I could just, because this is going to be a huge question for your board, every board, and AI. You all are going to districts are going to have to adopt an AI policy. We did come out with one. It's big. This topic is huge. It is changing all the time, but it's a place where your board can also really stamp in what do you want for education in the future for the kids of Lakeville. What do you want your staff to do with AI to save taxpayer money, to make jobs more efficient, to do projects that even 2 years ago, you could never even thought to ask staff to do. The guide I gave you, I did on AI. I would not have had time, to be honest with you, non-AI, to really do this. Your board your discussions on an AI policy are going to be the kind of robust, substantive, pedagogical, administrative, community type debate, and you should pick your moments, I guess is what I'm saying in part. Sometimes staff will say, we need this policy. Sometimes your lawyers might say, hey, a new case came down, you need to change the policy. If your lawyers ever give you advice about one of our model policies, follow your lawyer's advice. Follow your lawyer's advice, absolutely. But I would not close off advice from people who have to implement it. In fact, I would bring in your IT staff when you start talking about AI policies. They'll know more than I do about.
Sure.
And I'm looking at page 17, there's a policy that's in green, 618, assessment of student achievement. Obviously, we wouldn't want to make arbitrary decisions off of that and bring in the appropriate folks, but there is a certain level of accountability that the board may want to include in 618. So 618 is not a blue policy. There is a state statutory law about assessments in general. The MSBA has put together some content around it, and then it would be a good guidance for our staff if we had that. But it's one of those where we could
Right.
talk more of,
Yep.
so.
Yep.
Please let me take 2 off your table. On page 16, do not do anything on policy 614. I think we're going to get rid of policy 614.
School testing plan.
Okay.
Member Thompson, I think you alluded to this. It's a procedural policy. It just says, how do you do testing? You know, no phones, no candy, no, you know. The board doesn't need to weigh in on testing procedures.
Yeah.
So we're going to probably recommend that boards rescind policy 614. We're taking a close look at 615. We're just trying to think whether the board needs a policy on testing accommodations or whether there's a better way. We're working with MASC, the special ed folks, on do we want to keep 615 or is it, again, a procedural thing that we don't need the board to adopt policy to do? So I'm just trying to take a couple off the, and then we also took 617 out, but you already had gotten rid of it, I think.
Okay.
I've taken a lot of your time. Do you want me to talk about the 3 policies?
Sure, and I think we can just only do 701.1 and 904 because we realize that the 704 recommendations from our auditors are not in alignment with the MSBA
All
model
right, I'm
policy.
going to hand you, I developed a 704 for you.
Okay, all right.
And
You're on top of things.
I'm sorry to
I love
take a,
this.
but 704, this question on,
No, we have one. Did we not?
We have one.
you have one,
This
you
is
don't have the
red lines.
capitalization levels.
Oh, got it.
And I'm guessing your auditors were asking about capitalization levels.
The total threshold, I believe.
They were talking about threshold, saying that, I think they said 25K.
Yeah.
They said 100.
Yeah.
is too low.
Yes.
25 wasn't in the policy at all before. There was no number. I just looked at
There
this
was
one a
no
lot
number
today.
before. What we got, so up in, another district in this area asked, do we have a capital asset policy? Our auditors inform us we need to have one with a threshold of 10K and an aggregate of 25K. And they couldn't, this school district said, well, where is it? Here is another one, and they actually did add a sentence on capitalization levels in the policy. So in 704, we went back and we added capitalization levels
To the model policy.
to the model
Yeah,
policy.
okay.
Is it not in there?
No, it is. It is. Yep.
Yeah, so we added it to the model policy. The levels that we put are just recommendations that we were taking from the auditors telling the districts. They aren't set in stone. The law doesn't require it.
When you say auditors, which auditors are you referencing?
These are, I take it to be the district's own independent
So the
auditors.
independent
It's not
financial,
NDE.
'cause- so that's probably GASB. There's something in GASB.
It is.
That's
It-
probably driving that statement. So we could talk to our auditors and see where,
What they think
or
of
what
this.
that statement needs to be.
Yes.
Or can you make a policy that's generic enough? It says there's a minimum, there's a maximum.
Well, I
and
think
we
that's
leave-
originally what was in there. It was there was no threshold.
Right.
There was no
We didn't have any
threshold.
dollar
And it's
amount.
required?
I
Our
think-
auditors are
I think
required, yeah.
the auditors are saying that because of GASB. I was just.
And that's the
at-
GASB rule I just gave
I
you,
was
so
just
you can
at
keep that.
Ellers, and we went through a bunch of GASB. I shared this with you Friday. I'm sure you didn't read it in detail like I was, but I got a class on it, so in fairness. But GASB is probably driving that and telling you to have it in policy for liability exposure mitigation.
Something I noticed today that what our auditors are recommending is different than this. And so Brenda and Michael are going to take it back to our auditors before, we don't even need to discuss this right now probably, just to see what they think of these numbers or if they want to move forward with
Yeah,
the numbers they
and just
proposed.
for our audience, GASB is the Government Accounting Standards Board that governs accounting for government entities, which we are one.
Chair Cameron, I agree. If your auditors or your staff, you did come up with something different, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's,
think-
it's not a law that says those sentences have to be in there.
Yeah.
It's a more general requirement that we're trying to satisfy by putting those sentences.
I think the plan would be to bring, to either confirm this or adjust the numbers for the next meeting to bring to the board. So it would look very similar to this, just, or be the same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I sent it to Bill, and
Yeah.
he's going to talk it over
Great.
with our auditors.
Okay, thanks.
There were 2 final policies, if you'd like me to just touch on them, 701.1.
Yeah, and these are both under the audit, like technical edits. We were originally starting with just technical, but these are, I know we're on our consent agenda from our February meeting, and they were both pulled off. So, and we haven't had time to discuss them again yet.
You're correct that I would categorize these as, what you have in front of you right now, I would, if you have it in front of you, I apologize. 701.1, I didn't hand it
They're on
out.
the board book, if you're on that. Or I have one copy if people need.
Yep.
But I'll tell you, at least in the version we sent your board, the changes are changing Board of Education to School Board, which you can ignore. You can keep Board of Education throughout. I think that was, and then to the references. That's the only things that we had changed, which doesn't mean you can't have a question, but that's all we changed.
Right.
So then this goes back to Carly, your question or suggestion of, do you just approve it and we come back to it? Or is it one of those where, is it a policy that a board member has an interest in it? It's like, I want to talk about it. And so in this particular one, while we approve the budget in July or end of June, that is a set number ideally throughout the course of the year. But if there is a change to the budget where cuts need to be made, or we're going to spend more money than we need, then that was planned in June, how do we get notified?
Getting notified every quarter or almost every board meeting that whenever we're touching the budget or doing any adjustments in any of the funds that we have. And I've been very meticulous about that and will continue to be.
I think,
And I appreciate
Brian,
that, but that's not in here.
I think for
Well,
me,
it actually delegates to me that responsibility, and how I carry it out is what you guys are telling me as board members, that you want to monitor that, and I've been very faithful to doing that, and I would expect anybody who would replace me would do the same thing.
But they may not. So if we had it in here, then it ensures
But the
transparency.
The board would decide that.
I think for me, Brian, I think all of us, well, I'll speak for myself. I'm interested in diving into every policy like you. But I think where I might differ from your approach at the moment is that what I felt from the audit, what I'm hearing from you is that while all of these technical edit ones I'm interested in looking at, we have however many, 100 and whatever policies, my priority wants to go towards the ones that are most urgent in terms of we don't have them or we are significantly behind, knowing that these are important too. I'm not trying to say that these shouldn't deserve discussion. It's just, in my head, I'm trying to triage urgency. And so we could put these in any, this is kind of random that these two came up, right? It's not like, we could have picked two other technical. So I'm trying to think of as a board, what order do we want to talk? Not are some worthy of talking about or not. That's kind of where I'm at.
We are in triage situation. We have an approach that you were recommending, Terry, that we can decide upon as a board. This is how we triage. Once we're done triaging, then we back up and we say, what is the cadence that we want to take going forward as this board? And we might, for instance, this is a 6-month cycle per year, right, about? Mm-hmm. We might say, let's do this 6-month cycle, and in the second 6 months of the year, board members get to choose some different policies we review. As, people would have to vote on the ones that we decide to explore, but that still gives some opportunity to make sure we're staying on a cadence and also offering opportunity for exploratory review. That satisfies, I would say, I think everybody wants to make sure we're staying up to speed, up to date, and that we're not bucking our responsibilities, which is policy review and implementation and all those kinds of things. But we can't, we have to triage first. We're in a bad spot.
And if I might, Chair Cameron, the fire refinement policy was 904, was on your list. There is substantively, we didn't change the policy. I just put the definitions in alphabetical order. They weren't in alphabetical order. That doesn't mean you can't at some time discuss what libelous means or what material and substantial disruption means, you certainly could do that. But our recommendation at the time was simply clean it up, no substantive change, and then if you want to come back to it at some point, absolutely. But in triage, I would just make the alphabetical, put the definitions in alphabetical order.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but I know we're using the word triage, which is absolutely appropriate. But in the course of the conversation, I've heard Michael say politely, speed it up.
Right.
And I've heard Brenda say politely,
Yeah.
you're putting me in jeopardy.
Right.
I'm looking at these, and if it's not what it should be, I'm doing something that's totally incorrect. So if we were going to, not if, when we do triage, Brenda, Michael, would you make a suggestion or give input in regards to where you think the hierarchy should go? Because honestly, I think all of us would be throwing darts. Unless we understood where is your biggest jeopardy, or where's the list of your biggest jeopardy? And Michael, what is everything need to be on the fast track, or what are the, and I know the answer to that, but what are the things that need to be on the fast track?
Well, and I think in our conversations, that's kind of what I've asked, to say, you know, and you have been doing that, and Brenda's prepared a bunch of
Right.
red line copies that are ready for us to review. We just haven't been able to get to them because, you know, of the good conversation on policies, but I think that's the balance here.
Yeah,
you know?
and I think I think that makes sense, Amber, but one of the things that, I'm sorry. Terry, thank you. That Terry mentioned is, he really does have a list of already fabricated policies that if we don't want to get too crazy at the moment, I mean, here are X number of policies that would help you because most of them are mandated policies. And, you know, so, I mean, I think we could just,
Well, I think that's what you were kind of thinking,
and that's
right?
part of what Matt was
Not to put you on
saying
the
too,
spot.
yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's 41 that are technical edits that you could approve, we could approve in one meeting,
Right.
right, on consent agenda. But there are like 80-ish that are supposed to be triaged. I mean, that'd be the longest triage session.
We won't do them all at once.
Yeah, I mean, it would take a while.
But
If
I
I
think
could just
you've
correct one thing on triage, I don't consider any of the white policies triage, unless for some local reason you think
Okay.
of. I don't think there's any recommended policy needs to be fast-tracked.
Sure.
You all, Member Swanson, you could disagree with me.
Yeah.
And say, no, Terry, you don't understand. But
Yeah.
generally speaking, I'm limiting triage to blue and green.
And I feel like I've appreciated that you laid out like, let's focus on missing blue, then the review update blue, then missing green, review update green. And that's still a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and not all the policies are like way off. I mean,
Right.
even if they're blue or green and
Yeah,
they're
they're
in
not-
in the review update, it might just be a certain phrase here, a certain phrase there. And so they could go quickly. I guess the question is, if board members want to take a closer look, you know, and revise existing language, that's not part of the recommended update. So,
But maybe that's where we track that, ones that people are interested, and we cycle back around. So if the goal is really, like, I feel like we are not doing our job as a board and keeping these policies up to date. So let's get on our right track, and then we cycle back.
yeah, because I think the concern with Director Thompson is I might never see these policies again if I don't stop and talk about it now.
But then we don't move anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the challenge, is right now, if we're in, like, I feel like we're in the emergency department and there's blood coming out from various arteries here. Like, we've got to stop the bleeding and address this in a way that keeps our district safe. And then we go in for interest. Then we say, okay, which ones are we, especially after we've done review of certain ones.
Yeah.
I might say, oh, I'm interested in that, and Amber, I want that to go on the list of things that we go back to explore. But
Well, and I think not just keeping our district safe, but also helping our staff, and Brenda in particular, but others, do
Know
their
what to
jobs
do.
better.
Yeah.
And I think and it's also like what I might be interested in. Maybe I'm interested in, whatever, 605, whatever that is. But also, as representatives of our community, if there are issues boiling up or concerns that have been brought forward, I think that's when those, regardless of if they're part of this, we should probably interject those to think about, like, is this really how it should function here?
We could add public comment to our work sessions, and so then it would hit, you could hit 2 in a month then.
Oh, then it becomes a regular working meeting or business
mean,
meeting.
It is a meeting, but then it would meet the requirements of 208, where you have to
Sure.
offer public comment twice. So you could approve, yeah.
This is with the assumption that every board member wants to move forward in that direction. And again, the majority wins. So if we have 4 people that want to approve them by default as a blanket statement, that's what the board decides. And there's like you could literally have it done next week. It'd be done.
Well, how do people feel about this
Not all of them.
conversation?
But
We're talking technical edits, maybe,
Yeah,
is what you're talking
technical
about?
You can do technical, even you
yeah.
can do the mandatory. I mean, if the mandatories are just nothing.
Well, those would require first and second reading,
Yeah.
no matter what,
Well,
so.
we can
yeah.
update policy 208, get that done.
Okay.
Add
Yeah,
something?
Brenda,
Okay,
please.
so for the mandatory and legal, even though we aren't necessarily gonna be able to throw them on the consent agenda if they're not just technical edits, from my perspective, and I know the board owns policy, I'm not telling you what to do, but from my perspective, how I use these policies in my everyday work, we need to get through those quickly. And the first time around, just to discuss the updates to the legal language and requirements, because I use these policies in documents that I need to defend in grievances and arbitration and litigation. And if I misstep, that is a risk for the school district that I don't want on me. So I would say the first time around, if we could just do the recommended language in the policies and just get that done so that I know that what I am referring to is accurate and correct, we can get them back on the cycle and get them back to you quicker. We don't have to wait 6 months or a year, but to at least get those updates out there on the website, in the policies, so that I know what I am using in my daily work is accurate and up to date. Then we can bring them back and we can dissect them as much as you want and take as much time as you need. That would be my ask.
Well, and then that, to some degree, is a cyclical thing that has to happen, right? Like, policies are getting updated in that way, I imagine. I mean, some maybe not, but some of a frequent basis.
Okay, so.
do it.
Are there any other questions for Terry? Thank you for
I
giving your
took a
time
lot of your time.
tonight.
I'm so
been great,
sorry.
Terry.
I talked too much. I apologize.
No, it was very helpful, Terry.
Yeah, but you brought it to the masters for a little bit of.
Yeah,
Well, you can contact me anytime. Anything I could do to help. And Brent, specifically, like if you want to say, Terry, this green one, how much of it's statute? I can tell you, it's all statute.
Yeah.
The criminal background check,
Yeah.
it's all
Yeah.
statute.
Yeah.
So that may help speed things up as well.
Yeah,
So
okay.
you certainly can contact me anytime.
You know, it would be easy, no, I don't want to say easy, for me, and maybe others disagree, but I would just like to know what words are actually from statutory.
Yeah.
I mean,
You're not the only one to ask that. I mean that in a nice
I
way.
mean, if you
It's a
could throw it in Chat
reasonable
GPT and
question.
you just kind of like highlight it in green, call it probably Claude instead, but
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
That is some work.
Maybe I
we're
could do
talking-
that.
No, I think.
No, I can't do that. You should be doing
We
that.
couldn't do it a year ago. I think our ability to do it is much easier now.
Yeah.
And we just have to learn
I
how
think
to do it. But
that'd be
I
helpful.
think it's a worthy project. I am agreeing with you on
I
that.
think that'd be great. Good.
Every footnote.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. What I'm hearing is that from our administrators, board members are interested in trying to get updated so that we're in compliance, we're protecting our district, we're doing what's best for kids too, with making sure things are updated so that Brenda and others in the district can do their jobs efficiently and effectively. But then we will we'll start with the technical edits, perhaps at a consent agenda, and then go through Terry's idea of this blue-green process. But with the idea of trying to get these into compliance or updated as quick as possible, and then implementing a review process, like this 3-year cycle review process, knowing that at any time, if a board member wants to tackle a certain one, or if we're hearing community issues about a certain one, that can be interjected, in addition to the cycle that we're working on.
So one thing I'm hearing though too is, or maybe I'm just trying to clarify, we might run technical edits through the consent agenda, but based on what you're saying, Brenda, there are probably a number of policies every meeting where we want to be doing first and second readings potentially and not messing with them, or just like letting them go through.
Is it necessary to do first and second readings on those?
For
that are
new
added?
policies.
Well, maybe for the new, but for the ones that we have that are mandatory in nature, that it's coming from the state, because it doesn't really matter if it's 2 readings or 1 reading. It's like someone else is telling us we have to do it.
If it's existing, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so.
It depends on if it changes the substance of the policy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we're changing the substance of the policy, then it does require.
Which is fair, but then what are we and the community going to do about it? Because the state pretty much says, this is what you have to do. You don't have,
Yeah.
we don't
Yeah.
have a choice.
Yeah, I mean, we could technically do an emergency approval if we're saying it's required to be in compliance with the law, but then we have to come back within a year and review it.
Or we could change our 208, right?
Well, I mean, 208 allows you to do emergency one.
Yeah.
You just have to state that it's an emergency, and that's why you're approving it in one meeting.
I don't know I feel like that's a little, for me, emergency is like COVID and
Well,
something, or
yeah.
like some drastic thing has happened.
That's more than an emergency.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I don't know if we're quite an emergency. Brenda's like, yeah, we are.
If you're out of compliance with law.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think you could argue.
That's true.
I mean, we're looking at how long? Almost 2 months for a policy then to be reviewed? Because if we do one business meeting, generally a month. The next meeting, we'd have a business meeting. Maybe we just making a number up, like throw 40 policies out there. And then that would be the first reading, and then working session, and then the following meeting for it to be adopted. And so is it reasonable to hang tight for 2 more months? I mean, I guess it's already been so many months, right?
Oh,
So-
It's been 3 years.
It's
2
been 3
months
years,
sounds
right,
great.
right. I mean,
So the policy that exists around that was when administration pretty much handled this, and then by exception, the board would intervene on a particular one, and then you were in a rhythm already. But we have to do something different to make up for where we're at now. And to me, it's a change management. It's adapting to the change, and I think that you're exactly right, that it may not be prudent to do that or retain that, whether we classify it as an emergency or not. In my view, it kind of is an emergency in the sense that we need to get on with the triage, and we need to get on with liability mitigation.
So if we do allow, like you suggested, Matt, earlier, public comment at our next work session, then we could potentially, that would count for 2 meetings.
but then you're using that work session to approve 40 meetings or 40 policies.
We'd approve it at the next meeting.
Oh.
So is that
So-
what you're
so
saying?
still-
Yeah.
You still have a 2 meeting.
I mean, I don't know if we're going to be ready
40s.
in the next meeting to like have
I mean, the
technical ones,
So
sure,
I think
but
those will go on consent, correct?
but
then you could
add, I don't know, 10.
Brenda, what do you think?
or throw them all out there.
What would you like
Well,
to do?
I have, what did I do?
What?
You sent a
5,
lot.
6, and I think I did a number of series
yeah.
with technical edits that are ready. Amber has them, they're ready to go. Okay. And then I could select, according to the list that Terry gave us on the mandatory and like the on fire, we need to get these adopted right now. We can start with those.
Okay.
So I can go through and select those and send those to Amber to bring forward to the school board along with the technical edits. Because I have a whole bunch of those ready to go.
So do you think
And
the,
if we still,
Oh,
I'm sorry, go
yeah,
ahead,
go
Carly.
I was just gonna say, would that be then next work session, first reading, and then the following, so the board meeting next month that we could kind of jam pack?
First reading, from my understanding, it's got to be during a business meeting, a first meeting, not during a working session.
No, it just
Oh, I
says
think
at a
it could
meeting,
It could be
Public comment.
at a meeting
here,
where
too.
public comment is offered.
Paul,
But why don't
No
we,
meeting.
to speed this up, instead of doing work sessions, why don't we, if we have a block of these, as you're saying, why don't we just do 2 DS meetings and 1,
call a
2,
special
boom,
meeting.
it's done? We just cut the time in half, rather than drag it out with one of these plus one of those.
yeah,
Or 2 of these, and
It both accomplish the same thing, though.
right.
You know, I mean, we'd accomplish the same thing here.
What if we try to get technical edits done at the next session, which would be, you counted them,
2 weeks.
something. And then we could see how that goes.
okay.
Well, then May could be, like, what you feel like are the priorities plus
I
the.
mean, the sooner you can get drafts out to the board members so we can review them.
Yeah.
You know, but if you send 20 to us on Friday,
Right.
That's not gonna work.
Yeah,
a
we
little
won't do
tight.
that.
Yeah.
because then by the time,
Can you,
do over
I mean,
the
can you
weekend.
send an email to all of us? We just gotta make sure we don't respond.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
and you could even respond back to just
I
Brenda.
can just-
Yes.
Got it.
Okay, so I'm
Okay.
gonna try to get all of the technical edits.
Ready for the next meeting.
You make your wish list. Let's do that, and then we'll.
Yeah.
Careful what you wish for.
Wait, let me. Yeah.
Okay. And then I think the
Yeah,
one we
it
do
goes
need
back
to
to the
consider
Jeopardy.
those, the audit one, because that one you wanted
Yeah.
done by June.
Yes.
So we just
Yeah.
want to make sure that's, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I learned a lot. Next, we're going to move to the quarterly data review, picking up where we left off on, from our last work session. There's a packet in the board book with the presentation, and I think we'll pick up where we left off. With that being said, and Tracy, I'll turn it over to you in a minute here, but math data has been added. So when we're looking at this, don't miss that part, because I think that's in between kind of where we left off and where we started, so. Is it okay? to-
That's exactly
All right.
where we're going to start.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Hopefully, this will be more exciting than policy. Michelle, Sandy, and I are happy to be here with you to share some of our quarterly data with you. Just to say as we begin, as we review these numbers, please note that these numbers are a snapshot in time of what our kids were displaying. It's not a full movie or a full picture of how we look at our students academically or their success in school. As Director Cameron said, you can follow the quarterly data review document that's in the school board notes.
Board book.
In the board packet,
Yep.
thank you. We are going to start out with our key math trends, and we're really thrilled to see the strong growth data that we are seeing from our elementary students especially. We are seeing high proficiency rates, and our students have actually already exceeded our target goals that we set for ourselves for this school year. We see an average proficiency of our students between 73.8% and 80.8%. Kindergarten was very strong at 83% this winter. Grade 2 was actually 10 points higher, which is our largest gain for our elementary students. And you'll see that at the elementary, we are between that 73.8 and a little bit above 80. Did you have a question?
Tracy, one of the things hold on. Tracy, one of the things I've asked, over the past year when we were talking about dashboards and metrics, was aberrancies. Good aberrancies and not so good aberrancies. And understanding what created that aberrancy and either duplicating good ones or finding ways to nullify the not so good ones. So is it too early to ask the question on grade 2? Why is that aberrancy a 10-point spike? And then when you look at grades 6, 7, and 8, well, I'll say 6 and 7, it starts getting a little scarier, and 9. So did you has anything been determined with?
Yeah,
with-
you ask a great question, and it's one that we're asking ourselves as well.
Okay.
We don't want to make any assumptions based on the data, and it is early because we're just seeing winter results, and we want to follow this through to spring to see any changes that we might see in those scores as we move forward. So we don't want to assume, but I think Sandy can share some of the pieces that she's looking at.
Thank you for that question. First and foremost, I want to commend our teachers at the elementary level. They have been putting considerable amount of work over the last couple of years of not only working towards implementation of the new standards, but implementation of bridges. This is the first time we've ever really had the opportunity to set aside 60 hours of professional development. And so last year, our teachers in grades 4 and 5 had 60 hours while we flip-flopped with READ Act. And this year, our K-3 teachers have that opportunity. And it's really been skillfully led by our teaching and learning coordinators. Have been doing a phenomenal job. The other piece that I would state is when you're comparing elementary maybe to secondary, elementary is just a little bit further along in the standards-based review process. We started our standards-based review process at the elementary level in about 2020, anticipating the new standards. So we spent a considerable amount of time front-loading that professional development so that we could link it then moving forward to that new resource. Now at the secondary level, as you noted, we're in the early phases of the standard-based review process. We have a phenomenal coordinator as well at the secondary level who is leading that. And next year, our secondary teachers will be field testing resources to bring forward to the board for approval. So we're just a little bit further behind in that process, but well within the trajectory to be in line with the full implementation for those new standards.
So, Sandy, did you just mention you had training for grades 4 and 5?
We had training for 4 and 5 for bridges last year, because if you recall, grades K and 3 were doing READ Act, and then we flip-flopped it. So now 4 and 5 are in the thick of things with READ Act training, and then K3. What really was a blessing in disguise was READ Act, because we had to set aside 60 hours of professional development for READ Act training at the elementary level, and it really offered us the opportunity to move a little bit ahead in the standards-based review process for math, because as you know, we don't have courses at the elementary. If you're an elementary teacher, you teach all of those. So we took advantage of those extra PD days and put it in place for math, and then flip-flopped it. So that was done strategically to take advantage of that time.
I think it's also interesting to note with your grade 9 numbers that you've removed 190 of kind of the highest math students.
Yes,
So
correct.
I just think that's important in that number. This is not all of our ninth graders.
It's not the same cohort.
Yeah.
So, and it really, when you look at that particular one, it does reflect a different testing group, so
Sure.
thank you for that. And it's really based on those students who were enrolled in a higher level math course, because it didn't necessarily align then to the assessment, so
Yeah.
it didn't make sense. So thank you for calling that out.
Okay. We also disaggregated our math data by our special education students, or students who are receiving special education services. Please remember that these are not students who are just receiving services for math. This is our entire group of students who are receiving special education services. And we see gains made in grades 1 through 5 as well. Grade 2 is replicating what we saw with our total population. And so we're seeing the same patterns here. We also worked with our principals to disaggregate this data by their buildings. So they were able to look at how they are faring as a site. And we looked at how we are, what themes we're seeing across the district to be able to shore up those systems that we might have in place that are supporting us or taking away from what we need to do with our students.
Could we potentially see the disaggregated data for ELL students as well?
We could, that is not something that was on our metrics dashboard, that's why we didn't bring it to you, but that is something that we've been looking at as an administrative team.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like, depending on reading proficiency for both math and reading, I imagine some of the math is probably impacted by reading.
So you're thinking our
Or
80%
language
score for
proficiency.
elementary might actually be higher because you're baking in ELL students and it's special education in that metric as well.
Correct.
So this is our
Yes.
entire population.
This is our entire population.
But then if you had another view, non-special education, ELL, then the
Well-
metrics would be different.
And not only, like, I think it's important for us to disaggregate these groups and see how they're doing, right? So where do we push resources? Or I imagine that's part of what you're looking at, is like, if we see much lower scores in certain groups, that would be targeted resources for those groups.
It is, and that's what our departments are working on together to identify where's the data support, the direction we want to go.
Yeah.
How do we budget for that? Where do we put our resources accordingly?
Matt?
Do you have certain buildings that are, I'm sorry. I know. I know, that's really bad.
Matt's next.
Going back to Paul's question, I mean, are you guys able to look at and see, because if we're at 80%, for instance, I mean, that's going to be the average. So some schools are probably above 80% and some are below. I mean, is your staff looking at, okay, what are those schools that are higher? What are they doing that we can pick up and, bring that across the district?
Yeah, we are looking into those themes. What we want to remember too is that it's different cohorts of students in our different buildings. There's different demographics. When we're looking at EL, there's different levels of EL that we have to be mindful of. Some students are newcomers. They are brand new to the district versus students who might have been in the program for 5 or 6 years. Our special ed as well, there's different levels of programming. So we can't just compare one school to another school because there's so many variables that make up that cohort of students that we want to be mindful of that. But when we're looking at themes, we want to take what are those teaching practices that are happening in particular buildings, or maybe even how is the principal guiding that differently in a building. We're looking at all of those aspects.
And do we have the data where you can track those cohorts, like on a longitudinal standpoint, so you can see how kids are progressing year to year, even depending on the various teachers that they're having?
We do, yes.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I do think springboarding off of Matt's comment, which springboarded off of my comment, I know there are different populations in each of the schools, okay? Cohorts, populations. But one of the things, if we're making decisions on money, on resources, on all the things that everybody's aware of, I think it would be helpful. And last year, we actually asked for data all the way down to the classroom level, and I know there was some debate on that. But shouldn't the board know what, if there are 5, 6, 10, 20 elementary schools, because everything is growing, or middle schools or high schools, shouldn't we know, instead of an average, what the schools, which schools are having difficulty and which schools aren't? Because I think it would help us in decision-making, again, in regards to resources, if we understood that better. When we see an average, it's a great number, but we don't really know who's struggling and who's not struggling. Back to what Matt said, who's struggling and who's succeeding. The average doesn't tell you that. The average just shows you, it just blends everybody together. I mean, it's that old joke about an actuary who drowned in the middle of the river because the average height of the river was 5 feet, and nobody knows what the middle of the river is. And I think that's really
You're saying for like resource allocation? at
yes,
the
for
board level?
resource
I
allocation.
think for me, where I'm at is, and I think I take this maybe from my work at the university, and I know we're not the Board of Regents, but I like to think we are sometimes, for Lakeville, and that is, we're at the system level. That's how I think of this, and I need to see system level trends. So I appreciate this data, but what I do expect is that the superintendent and staff are monitoring how we drive these system numbers up. So it's not my job to understand how you're going to drive the number or where the resource should be allocated. It's your job to bring that to us, to say, you know, here's where we're seeing progress. We need to move money here, or we need to add staff here, or whatever. But I'm not going to look at building level data, at classroom level data, and be able to understand from a system perspective my role in that. And I think that's, you know, when we have 12,000 plus students, our role is to make sure the whole system is improving, and that the staff's job is to bring to us, to do it in your daily work, and to bring to me, to bring to us recommendations when you need our approval. But your job is to move these numbers up. And however you're going to get there is kind of yours to figure out. Not to, sorry, I feel like I'm being very like, well, we don't handed, but like, we want to see the numbers improve, right? And that's the whole point of the dashboard and setting these goals. And we need to keep monitoring that progress. But how that progress happens is not necessarily, it's not our expertise, and it's not where I think what we're monitoring.
We don't have the context for a lot of it. So even as you're explaining, different programs are in different schools, different students are in different schools, and so to explain the data to that level is not really, yeah.
But I mean, I think there might be instances where you say, hey, you know, after looking at the data, we found out that this school and this principal was leading this initiative with this curriculum that was working really well.
Right.
And now we're spreading it to other schools. I mean, that's kind of exciting things to hear about if you're on the board, you know, where we found success somewhere,
Yeah.
we're going to try to replicate it
Oh, yeah, I
across
don't
the
disagree
district.
with that.
Yeah. And again, it's not that I'm going to be pointing at classrooms.
I think
don't
there's
get me
always been
wrong,
an
but-
interest, though, to like compare buildings and to say this school is
Sure.
great and this school is awful, without understanding what makes up that statement, whether it's student demographics. And there is some, in my opinion, like people performance issues at times, right? And I expect Superintendent Baumann to address that with principals and then down the chain. But that us comparing schools isn't going to help drive these numbers. I think what is making sure our staff are monitoring those things.
Yeah, Amber, I want to be, if I may, Brian, I want to be really clear. I think we need to be careful about this school's awful or whatever terminology you want to use. I'm not suggesting that's what we're saying here. What I'm suggesting is the more data we understand, the stronger and the better decisions we can make on revenue and resources. And that will help. So it's not like you're a bad school, you're a good school. That's not the intent here. I want to be really clear.
I mean, we get metrics at the capacity level for each elementary building, and we know kind of like which one's like high capacity and which one is not. I appreciate the average of the average, which is good, but I think what I don't know is like how far could we go? Because if there's another school that's actually at 95%, like that number is actually possible because there's another school that can get there. Now again, demographics, who knows? Teaching staff, whatever, plays a huge part. But if there's 3 schools that are in the 30s and the 40s, and then the rest of them are actually in the 90s, but yet the grade 2 level is 80%, that doesn't really tell the full story either.
So maybe what we need, not necessarily building level data, but whenever we're looking at stats, what's the variation across? So what is the standard deviation, you know, if we're looking at averages, what is the standard deviation across the buildings? Or is there general kind of consistency, and not naming things, but is this kind of the number we're seeing across the school? So what is the span around those?
But how's that any different from
what's the low
capacity
nine?
levels for high
What's the
school or for
variation?
middle school or elementary?
What?
Superintendent Baumann, do you want to?
Yeah, so everything everybody's saying here is there, every point is correct and accurate. Our approach is to establish the standards, and take a systems approach. You have every right to expect that if School A is having great success at something and School B is not, you should believe and know that we are looking at that and through our teaching and learning department and our processes there that we are accounting for that. But I guess I have to ask at some level, you have to trust that we are going to address these. We have given you a plethora of data. There's the QDR that we're doing here. There's also a visualization that we have prepared for you as a walk-up to this. So I think a lot of the data that you're talking about, you have. And I want to keep the conversation focused on what you've asked us to provide, which is this QDR in the manner in which we have provided it. But we are embarked on a journey to elevate our performance across the system. And right now we're just talking about comparing our data from fall to spring in just one testing band of math and reading. MCA is kind of the bigger thing. And that's, I think, aren't we in testing right now?
Just today.
Right now.
Yeah, so
In the thick of things.
I think there's more, as Tracy said earlier, we're just, I don't want to get bogged down in the weeds too much and think about it on systems. Now, when we start talking about resource allocation, which I think I've heard multiple times, we are resource constrained. I think everybody knows this. And our responsibility as an administration is to bring to the board recommendations based on competent analysis with regard to resource allocations and answer all your questions about that to the end of improving our student performance across the system, whether it's secondary or elementary or school to school. And I think we can do that because we have been listening and implementing, and we're continuing to do that. One of the biggest challenges we have right now is doing that data investigation at a deep level in order to articulate what it is exactly our pain points or our issues that are systemic issues that we can resolve to get to where I think everybody wants to go. And again, I'm just going to ask you for your trust that we are committed to doing this work deeply, and I think you'll see results based on how we bring that back to you and the information that we already are providing you. So I just ask for that.
Chair.
Kim?
So I have a question about the special education data. When we're comparing special education students, and as it says on here, this is any student identified in special education. I think the bigger concern I have with the accuracy of the data is if the students actually had access to the core curriculum and the core instruction, whether it was pull-out and they were provided an intervention or were in that core content. Because if they didn't have access to the core content, then it wouldn't make sense, or it would make sense that their scores would be lower. So can you provide some information around that? Like, are all of these special ed students, do they all have access to core?
Yeah, I would say yes. We didn't disaggregate the data by that. For students who are who may be receiving reading services or math services, the data in here is a student who receives any special education services. So know that, I mean, we are looking at that and digging down deeper into that because
Okay.
I think that does skew the numbers on what it is and
Right.
gets to.
Just for clarification for the other board members, is when a student is identified for special education, there are several decisions that a team has to make on how instruction is provided. Sometimes they're pulled out of their class for just a little bit of time and they're getting an intervention on skills that they are missing, like skill gaps. Sometimes they're fully pulled out because the skill gap is so wide that them being in that general education curriculum would be too much for them. We have to go back and reteach things before we can work them back in. So my question is, when I'm looking at the special education data and we're comparing it to students that are always in core curriculum, gen ed, and you look at the special ed data, that's going to look different if they're not exposed to the core curriculum, because now we're testing them on something that they've never been exposed to. So again, I just think that when you're looking at some of those disaggregated numbers, you need to be cautious in how you interpret those.
I think it's also with with the special education numbers, I think it's helpful to like look at subsections of student populations, so I appreciate that. I'm interested in this, in refining it more. You know, we have students in the gifted programs who receive services, right? So I want to be careful too, like, just because you're receiving special ed services doesn't mean the district doesn't understand that you're highly capable or, you know, what, so I think that's important too. And I know you know that, but.
Or EL services, I
Or
would say,
EL,
too.
or whatever, yes. That there's a range in any group of people, yeah. Matt, yeah.
No, I do want to say, I mean, I am encouraged by this, and I like seeing the data. We do have, I mean, we can go school level on Infinite Campus, like all the board members have access to that. And so, I mean, you can see the variation in different schools, and I just think it's interesting. I love hearing what you guys are doing and how you're using the data to push this thing forward. I think it's encouraging as a board member, so then we can track it too, right? I do have another question. It's related to the FastBridge stuff, but just on tracking purposes, are we able to correlate, you know, not meeting benchmark scores in FastBridge with students who are then also failing classes? And I know that might apply more to like the middle school level, because I don't know that we track failing in elementary school. But are we seeing a correlation between the FastBridge scores and students that are failing?
Yeah. We are seeing a correlation between those FastBridge scores and as what you'll see later on as we go through the data with those students who are failing.
Okay. I mean, is it high percentage?
There is a direct correlation. I don't know, I don't have the data in front of me to say what percentage it is, but it is a high correlation.
Gonna keep going?
Okay, yep.
Yeah,
Sure.
Melissa, Miss-
We did provide some additional information around action steps that we're taking, how we're trying to build stronger systems of support for both math and literacy. I can't speak more highly about the systems that Sandy and her team, our teaching and learning coordinators, are putting into place to help support our teachers. You've seen the 4 phases of our standards-based review process, making sure that our teachers know exactly what those standards are and what students need to know and be able to do, and then finding resources that align with those standards has been really important to get us through this. And so they are doing just outstanding work there. So let's move on to our grade point average for our students. And just so you know, for high school, this was at the end of the semester. So this would have been in January. And for our middle school, our GPAs are rolling. So our grades are rolling. There's not like an end point. And so this is not updated as of today. It's from when we printed this document in the first place. But our grade point averages are stable. Our goal was around 3.3 for all grade levels. And so we're remaining pretty stable with those GPAs. Sandy, do you want to talk about action steps?
Mm-hmm. So some action steps around the grade point average. We have our counselors and our deans and our APs. They're monitoring and providing academic counseling to ensure that our students are on track for graduation. In addition, students who may not be on track for graduation are identified for credit recovery through our Lakeville Pathways Academy. And as you know, the Lakeville Area Schools Policy 620, Credit for Learning, has been revised, meaning that weighted grades will be removed for the class of 2030 and any subsequent classes.
How do you think that will affect these high school GPAs? I mean, I would think we'd see a significant decrease.
So I had actually asked
Oh,
Emily
okay.
that, and it wasn't as big as I thought.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the change.
We'll see, I mean, it will make a
bump.
difference, because obviously if you're calculating an average with a
Right.
5-point scale and a 4-point scale combined, you're
Yeah.
gonna see an increase, but it wasn't as
Okay.
significant as we
Okay.
had anticipated it to be.
Okay.
So I would expect that we would see a shift, and then it really does, take a couple of years to establish 3 years to establish a data trend. So we might see some fluctuation in the meantime.
Yeah.
I bet there'll be probably some kids that don't take AP and take regular and then get A's and then help our GPA.
Right, that's true, yeah.
So,
Or concurrent enrollment.
or concurrent enrollment.
We just talked about that again today, didn't we? Yep. For sure. Right, moving on to failing one or more courses. Again, this was at the end of semester one, or January, the end of January for our high school students. And this is a rolling failure rate for our middle schools. And compared to the students that had in-progress failure rates in the fall to our winter at the final semester, we had some improvements there. We saw the number of students, the percent of students actually decreased in the number of failures, which told us that our system is really working to ensure that those students are passing their classes and they're learning along with that. At the middle school, we saw an increase in grades 8 and 7 and a decrease in grade 6. And if you'll recall that we talked about in the fall that our students in 7th and 8th grade had the 50%
No fail F?
Yeah, no,
Or
least harmful F, thank you. And so they are getting used to a new way of looking at grading practices. And so we expected to see a few more failures, but our teachers and our staff are working hard to make sure that those students are turning work in and passing those classes. Do you want to talk about?
Do we ever hold students back saying, you're not ready to move on to the next grade?
Do you want to talk about that?
So we do have some retention procedures in our district, and best practice in research really states to do that early on. It does have some significant impacts if you do it later. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't consider it, but your best success rate is if you do it in K1. And the success rate isn't higher. Usually when it happens in higher grades, you have a higher dropout rate.
So when you say K1, like kindergarten, first grade, and that's it. And so once students are in 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, we're not holding kids back. We're going to push them through no matter what. Is that how
I
mean,
wouldn't
not
say
no matter what, but then we're going to push
Yeah.
them through. We're going to get them. I mean, I guess I feel like there's a compounding effect where if you get a C in 5th grade, and then you're not prepared for 6th grade, then you get a C- in 6th grade, D+ in 7th, unless some sort of remediation effort is coming. I mean, if they're not proficient to move forward, maybe that's a separate conversation for us, but I'm
I think
just
what
curious.
you would want to be putting in place is re-engagement and intervention strategies, and work through some strategies and supports that will accelerate to close that achievement gap, because the research really isn't supporting that retention, particularly at the older grades. And as we know, those are some things that we're looking further into, particularly at the secondary level, where we have some gaps and some holes.
Yep. I mean, if I'm reading the math, the percentage, it's 24% of 7th graders are failing one or more class. Is that how I'm reading it?
At that moment in time.
At this moment in time.
Yes.
Right, so the semester's not over, they could get a C or whatever, they could pass, but at the moment, 25% of our students that seems like a lot. I mean, if we've got,
It's because they didn't put the assignments in the grade book yet, Brian.
yes. That's what it is, yep.
Am I remembering too that, is it bar is only 9th grade?
That's correct.
So I think that is an interesting number here.
Yeah.
10% to, just under 7. Now, the other ones aren't that far behind, but
That's the
I'm
same
curious to
problem.
have you look at, is bar effective at helping students with, succeed academically? And do we need to think about bar in all?
Yeah, do we need more bars? I mean, not bars, but bars. I mean, bars.
Another
Yeah.
conversour we just had today, we just met with
interesting.
our 2 high school principals and our Pathways principal to talk a little bit more about BAR and how our system is supporting that work moving forward, because we do think it is so important for our students. And we've seen a reflection of that in some of our numbers.
I mean, the least harmful F, right? Those grade 9 students had that last year, and they were able to mature or
Yeah.
adjust, and they're at 6.8%. But again, grade 8, 7. Again, I get it. I get it's middle school, but
Well, yeah, I think looking at the transition from 8th to 9th, that's significant in that that's a hard transition for kids, right? And somehow we have the lowest issue with 9th grade. And that,
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting data point.
They get an hour more of sleep.
That's true. Good point.
A large piece of BAR is looking at data and constantly reflecting on how the students are doing, and then helping the teachers to support those students that need additional supports. So-
yeah. And I know that it's in April, and we've got budgetary conversations that will need to be had maybe at the next board meeting or coming up, because we've got to approve the budget for the next school year by end of June. And so I would assume, or I'm hoping, this is an opportunity where you've now got data to validate, we need more resources in these areas, and what does that look like? But again, we'll wait for your proposal and say, hey, here's where we want to allocate resources for the upcoming school year and where they ought to go, so.
On the snapshot of the middle school failure rates, or failing one class, do we know, like, for this same time period this year, where we were at last year?
We do, I just don't have that in front
Okay.
of me
I mean, is
here.
it drastically higher this year than it was last year, or the year prior to that?
I wouldn't say drastic, but it is higher.
Okay.
But we do have some trend data on that.
Yeah.
And this is failing one or more classes. It's like, in middle school, a lot of this could be just one class. Were there some classes that stood out predominantly as being the ones that kids are failing more often as opposed to the others?
It varied between the buildings, which was some of the data we were looking at. We really looked at math and literacy data were the two that we actually pulled for our principals to take a look at. And between all of the buildings, there were variation. And some of the systems level pieces that was showing us is that we have variation between how teachers grade in their classrooms and what their grading practices might be. And so as we are moving into standards-based review and we're talking about, do teachers know what they're supposed to teach, right? The standards. Do they know what students need to know and be able to do? As we're developing common assessments along with that, now we have to analyze common assessments. Are we analyzing those in the same way, from teacher to teacher, from school to school? And so we realize we don't necessarily have common grading practices across the board. And so that factors into some of this data as well as we're looking at it.
I think another piece to add to that is not only to understand what students need to know and do as it relates to the grade level benchmarks, but at what level of rigor. And so is classroom A compared to classroom B teaching it at that same level of rigor? And that's a really a huge component of the work that we do in standards-based review when we're unpacking those standards to really understand what we call the depth of knowledge, or the DOK, because we really want to make sure that if, say, for example, the MCA is assessing here at this level of rigor, are we teaching at that level of rigor? Or is there a disconnect? So that's part of the work in the standards-based review. So in addition to the grading practices, it's really about delivery of those benchmarks and at the level of complexity and the level of rigor. And then for those students who might need scaffolding or accessibility in order to reach that level of rigor, whether they're identified for special education or EL or just a general education student. How are we re-engaging the student so that they're able to access that complex benchmark?
That seems like a lot of variability. I mean, that just, I don't want to call it scale to 1 to 10. It seems high. I mean, if we're trying, because there's no consistency is what I'm hearing. I mean, it depends on which teacher you go to. One teacher might be a tougher grader, or maybe more rigorous, more relaxed. One's meeting standards, one is not meeting standards. And then for the students, where is the consistency for them as they go to the various classrooms for what needs to be taught? So is this?
And that's really the work of the standards-based review, to ensure that we have a guaranteed and viable curriculum and that it's cohesive across all of our buildings, and that we do have that consistency, and that our principals are supported so they know what they need to be looking for when they go into the classroom, and how do they support their teachers.
If you had to give
along the way.
yourself, if you had to give these schools a grade, not the schools, the curriculum and the standard base, I mean, are we at 60%? Are we at 90%? We're almost there? Or is the variation really bad and we're at 30% and there's a lot we need to do to get recalibrated and get all the staff, not the staff, but the curriculum and the standards-based review in sync?
I think if we're going to speak particularly to secondary, they're just entering phase 3, where you're really looking at that standardization, where you're identifying what that core resource is, and you're creating that scope and sequence to ensure that consistency. So in all fairness, we do have some inconsistency in our system because we haven't reached that space yet at the secondary level in our standards-based review. And potentially, it's too early to tell. It's just one snapshot in a larger photo album for the elementary level. But what we did notice is with implementing bridges, we didn't have an implementation dip. And that's usually an anomaly. Usually when you're doing something new, you have an implementation dip. But I think that's a testament to our teachers and their efforts and their hard work, and then having a target of which they're reaching, which was really delivered by our coordinators to have that consistency. So I think we have some space to work in that standards-based review, because we do have some unevenness right now.
It's a Wild
Can I-
West.
Can I ask a question about just the budget cuts that I was quite sensitive to a number of years ago around English in the middle schools? Are we noticing any trends there in terms of any impact on student literacy at that level?
From the data that I've been looking at, and fairly, I guess, can we still say we're new, Tracy?
No, I don't think so.
But at the secondary level, I don't think we've seen in that trend data any changes, very dramatic changes as it relates to our literacy at this point in time.
So you feel like the time that they have is sufficient for what,
Yeah.
in terms of meeting those standards?
And one of our coordinators at the secondary level, one of her pieces is to work really closely with the ELA teachers and the literacy teachers in grades 6 and 7 to ensure that we have some continuity and some cohesiveness. And it's a fantastic group. They're excited about the work, and they're also excited about implementing the new standards, learning about READ Act at the secondary level, because that will go on board next year for our ELA teachers. And they have a heavy lift, our secondary ELA teachers. Not only will they have the READ Act next year, they're implementing new benchmarks, and as you know, they're going to be implementing a new resource. It is a heavy lift, but it is a great synergy because they'll be able to directly apply their PD with the new resources and the new benchmarks. So it's kind of like an interesting dynamic.
Do you want to move to graduation rates?
Yeah, great.
Sorry, did you have a question?
Nope, I was just thinking in my head, you guys, you need some more people.
We're a mighty duo.
Talking out loud.
Creating doubts on it.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a $3 million number thrown around a couple of
I thought it was 18 million. Just kidding.
Taking a look at our graduation rates, these graduation rates have just recently been called to our attention and sent out from the state level. And so we didn't have these in the earlier book for you. And so we were happy to be able to add this. We are proud of our 4-year graduation rate, which shows from 2025, which is 93.1%. And this is an increase of 1.5% for us as a district, and it is 8.2% above the state of Minnesota. So we're very proud of that increased number. We also look at our 5-, 6-, and 7-year graduation rates. And what I'd like to explain to you is that the 5-year graduation rate is what they do is they'll take the graduation rate from 2024. In this case, we had a 91.6 graduation rate. they'll recalculate it with the students who have graduated since 2024, and we moved up to 94.6 graduation rate for 2025 for a 5-year rate. And our 7-year rate would have been students, the cohort of students who graduated in 2022. That was 92.7%, and we've moved that to a 94.8%. So we're seeing gains in all of those graduation rates across the board. Any questions around graduation rates?
I appreciate the graduation rate. I'm glad that we've got students with the diploma. They move on with their next chapter in life. I think for me, I'd love to see where is their proficiency along with that graduation rate. Just are we graduating more kids and they're smarter, or are we graduating more kids the baseline is the same, or are we graduating more kids because they just passed all the classes and they're not at previous it's an unfavorable trend, if that makes sense. I don't see that as a metric, but again, I didn't ask for that, but that would be interesting to see. Okay, we've got kids graduating, but at what level are they graduating at? Make sense?
Yeah, and I think in response to your statement, we understand that, and that encompasses the rigor that's in the classroom, that are we meeting the standards? But then I also want to caution that these tests, FastBridge and MCA, are one day in time.
Yes.
It's a snapshot. It doesn't show the full student's academic history, so.
I thought we were going to capture MCA, not MCA, but ACT scores. Was that? We have that?
Yeah. And I think maybe also pairing grade point average with graduation rates, right? I mean, you could look at the bands of a GPA, how many are SUMA and Magna, and et cetera.
I can add one more piece of that to your question, Director Thompson. One of the things that we have tracked over time to the best of our ability, to the availability of the data, because it's not our own, is students that go to a 2 or 4 year college or technical college and are required to take the English and math assessment. And so what we've done is we had tracked over time the percentage of students that were required to take a remedial course before they could access their regular coursework in college. We saw a decrease in those numbers over time. I obviously don't have them readily available in front of me, but that's another thing. The problem with that data is that there's so much of a lag on it that it doesn't really give us real-time information to engage with in terms of making any type of adjustment in our system to meet that requirement. But it's just an interesting piece to look at. When the data first became available, this was, I don't know, quite a number of years ago, we saw some high numbers in students that were required to take those courses, and then worked with the principals and the staff there and saw those numbers actually coming down. So it's just one more, it's just one more piece of information. It doesn't have a super high level of value because we can't react to it, sort of like the MCA, they're post-mortem. But it is something interesting to look at. Like, how many of our kids, where are they going? How are they doing when they get there? Are they coming out of our system prepared for whatever their next step is? And then, of course, that is only tracking students that choose a college route.
I saw on social media, and I'm not saying it's true or not true because it's social media, but I think I read something where a high school student sued the high school because she didn't do very well at the collegiate level.
Proficiency.
And because she wasn't proficient because the high school gave her a certain GPA. I didn't read all the details. It was just...
Yeah,
it was
just to be clear,
an
the
alert.
details is the individual was not from Lakeville area school.
Right. That's good detail. Good detail. But that's my. But it's one of those where but it's one of those where we've got good graduation rates, but how do we also then validate that we're graduating,
Capable, qualified, ready to go on to tackle the world is,
Students.
what we want. And, there are indicators. I think Lakeville area schools doesn't fall into the category of graduating people unprepared. Now, you might find instances, but I get your point, and we all understand that, and I think it starts before in pre-K, right? That's where it starts for us, and I think we're on the right track here, doing the right things, and it's fair for you to ask that. And maybe we can have an internal conversation about what's a way to metric that better to help you have confidence that our students are graduating and they are ready to go tackle.
Yeah.
I guess like I would look at it, I think we're really focusing in on one metric, which is the academic success. And I think it's more of a profile of a student than academic success, because that's going to look different for any student that graduates. Like, it's not just about, did you get a 3.5 or a 4.0? I mean, I graduated with students that got a 4.0 and they failed out in college because they didn't have social skills and work study skills and all of those other soft skills that sometimes they're overlooked. And I look at the importance of those just entering the workforce and knowing how to interact with people is a big deal too. Like, those are things that have to be taught as well. So it's more of a profile of a graduate than just like a GPA. And when I think about that, I also think about our students in special education. I mean, that looks different for them too. And just because they may not have the highest GPA, or maybe they do. I mean, sometimes we're twice exceptional as well. They can have success just like any other student, and it can look different. So then I think about like the students that went on and did something. Did they, after they graduated, did they get a job? Like, what are those like soft types of survey skills that you can send out to kids after they graduate? Did you go on to a technical school, or did you graduate from a college? Because I think that is a little bit more information on, are they successful with what they have planned after they graduate, not just like, did you do something and go on to a four-year school and get a degree? Like, I just think about those pieces as well. And when I think about allocating resources, like Paul had said, I also think about, yeah, it's great that we have interventions, but then, you know, our counselors are also providing some of those soft skills when they're doing social skills, and our 360 workers are also supplying, you know, resources for families so that kids can go home and they have full bellies, you know, when they come to school the next day. And all of those things factor into what makes our schools successful.
The other piece too that we have on our community-facing website is we have some data from SLEDS, which is the statewide longitudinal educational data system. It is a little bit lagging in its data.
Isn't it 3 years, or is it
3 years?
Yeah.
3
And the latest one that we have on our community-facing website that kind of speaks to what Dr. McDonald was speaking to is that 7% of those who entered college needed some developmental education. So that kind of leads to what Emily was sharing. But we do track that data on SLEDS, and it is part of the report that we send out to the Department of Education as it relates to the Comprehensive Achievement and Civic Readiness Plan. And so that's one part that's on there. And it is public-facing for all of our community to see some of that SLEDS data and where they are, how many of our students go into post-secondary education, how many go directly into the workforce. I think based on this data, we tracked 16% of our grads enter the workforce immediately after graduation. So all of that is available for our community on our website.
I would just also add that one of the things that Grace Olson and I have been working on is on our alumni relations. And if we really, to what Kim was saying, if we want to look at a more comprehensive picture of our students that are leaving our system, we need the qualitative as well as the quantitative data points. So last year, she and her team really built up access on our website to be able to capture contact information for our graduates, and then our next step around that is to build out a survey to help us understand after they leave our system what was their experience in our system. Because I think all of these little pieces together give us the best chance of understanding how our system is performing and where we might need to be plugging in a little bit differently. Now, the timeline for the alumni survey got a little waylaid because we've had a couple levies in between. Her team's been a little busy, but we're going to circle back on that as well.
You want to bring us home with the attendance data?
Really
Or-
quickly,
yeah.
I do
Oh, yeah.
want to acknowledge on the graduation rate, some of the, as we're looking at this data, I want to make sure that we talk about the work that our guidance counselors have been doing at the high school. That was a outstanding addition to our high schools to provide academic support to our students when they need it. Additionally, Margaret Gare and Janet McBride at Lakeville Pathways are doing an outstanding job supporting our students with credit recovery so that students can go to them and they can take portions of classes that they failed rather than taking courses all over again. And so they have been able to support our students in recovering credits more quickly than they would if they had to take a full year or a semester course all over again. So that's been some great work that's happening there to support our kids.
Right. And I was going to mention at our next meeting, there'll be a high school update that will include counseling update. So
It's two, we'll have the general overarching high school update from the principals, and then we will have a separate presentation on the counseling.
Will Pathways be there as well? with the high
Pathways
school?
will be there as well, yes.
Okay. Attendance data, and I'm going to have Michelle help with this one. I will explain what the attendance data means. The Minnesota Department of Education has us report 90% attendance data. And so it's when students are present 90% of the time. As you can imagine, at the beginning of the school year, they have 100% attendance on the first day, right? And as we go throughout the school year, they're going to miss more days of school throughout the year. And so that attendance data will actually trend downwards. So what we're seeing, though, is that our baseline at elementary was 94.47%, and at winter, we're at 94.67% at the elementary. At the middle, we are at 94.48%, and at the high school, we're at 92.1, which in the spring, our baseline was 89.76. So do you want to speak to those?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think, I know we've been talking a lot about our counselors these last couple of minutes, and just wanted to put a plug in for them as well when it comes to attendance, because they are integral in helping to identify barriers for kids with attendance and putting in different levels of support. So really with the attendance, we are in kind of the planning phase this year of being able to track the data. We have established a district-wide attendance committee, which has met a couple of times already this year. And really the purpose of that committee is to be developing clear and consistent attendance practices across the district, and then also being able to, as we move on, learn more about what are the additional supports that students may need to help increase the attendance. But overall, I'd say our attendance is pretty strong.
does this include both unexcused and excused? Okay, great. So it's not just unexcused.
And this would be a full day absence?
Yes.
Okay.
And we know our students have to be in school to learn.
Yeah.
And so we're very appreciative of the work that Michelle and her team are doing to make sure to encourage attendance, and that district attendance team that she has coming together is really instrumental in supporting that work.
Any questions?
It'd be just for another day, but I'd be curious, like, do we have a lot of people taking vacation? Or traveling? Or are they actually sick? Or, I'm just curious, I mean, the 95% attendance record is great. I'm not saying that that shouldn't be any higher, but it's just interesting, like, I wonder why are they taking time off, So, that's going on in my head.
All right, anything else for today? All right, with that, I think we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you.
Move to adjourn. Wait. I want to see what Brian thinks. We got 15 more minutes. We got to hit the 3 hour
I get addicted
mark.
to that when I'm just sitting in front of the TV at night. I'm just sitting